Hey.
Hello, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. It is good to be back. I feel like we've had quite a hiatus. Happy summertime, everybody. I'm joined tonight, as always, by my lovely co-host, retired homicide lieutenant Brian Sanders. How you doing, Brian?
Incredible. You know why?
Why?
Because I hit the right button.
Oh, did you get your mic doing what it was supposed to do when it was
been
supposed to do it?
No echo or anything.
That's fantastic. I'm sure they'll let us know. Guys, welcome back to Night Shift. If you are new here, this is a true crime podcast, so you know what to expect with that kind of thing. We also are a live show on YouTube. Summertime has kind of changed us up a bit, but usually it's every Tuesday night between 8 and 9 Eastern Time, PM, that is, hence Night Shift. And then you can always listen wherever you stream your audio podcast. So your iTunes, your Spotify. If you haven't already, go on and hit download on those. Hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified of any new shows that come out. And same with the Andrea Up Late YouTube channel. So we are talking about a case tonight that occurred in Tennessee in 2011. So this was actually a listener recommended case. 2 or 3 people have recommended this one. If you've recommended a case and I haven't gotten to it, there could be a multitude of reasons for that. So I always encourage everyone to remind me again in case it's something that I've forgotten or misplaced that note, or sometimes I haven't because either there's just not enough. It might be an intriguing story, but it's not enough information to actually, produce and write an entire show on. Tonight is the opposite of that because I actually was just mentioning to Brian that before we started, this probably should have been a 2-parter, but it's not going to be. We're going to knock it all out in one episode tonight and get through it. So if you are not new to Night Shift, then you know that we do often cover either unsolved or unresolved. And we say unresolved because sometimes things on the surface look like they have not been solved, but maybe investigators have pretty much a full idea of exactly what happened and who did it, but for whatever reason, charges can't be brought, or such as in this case, convictions do happen, but then things might change that could impact that ruling. So that's what we're going to be discussing tonight with a whole lot of information. Brian, I did not have you do our pop culture news for tonight like we often talk about, but again, this was 2011, and I feel like...
Never mind then.
Do you have it?
No, I'm just kidding. I don't. That was a blank piece of paper.
I think that we've discussed this before, but the first decade of the 2000s, man.
Yeah.
In terms of pop culture.
No.
I don't know about all that. A little bit bland. Okay, well, the second I try to read with these glasses on, I can only see far away with these, so I'm going to take these off probably. But we're going to go on and I say we get started without further ado. What about you?
Let's do it.
This is a lot of info. So I will be referencing a book in the latter portion of the show, reading some excerpts here and there. And when I get to that part, I will explain to you the author and why I'm reading from that. But just know that that'll be part of the second part of the show, and it comes with a lot of pretty great information. So let's get started. We're going to be talking about the case of missing and murdered Holly Bobo. And again, this was 2011 in Tennessee. So Holly Bobo was a 20-year-old nursing student when she went missing. Holly was living in, there's a place, so Decatur County, Tennessee is kind of on the border of 2 cities, Parsons and then like Darden, which are both kind of communities within that county. So I'm just going to reference the county because that encompasses pretty much all the locations of everything that took place here. So she was living in Decatur County, Tennessee, which is approximately 60 miles southwest of Nashville. So if you look at kind of a diagonal line between Nashville, which is smack in the middle of Tennessee, and then Memphis, which is on the southwestern corner of Tennessee, where she lived in Decatur County was almost exactly halfway between Memphis and Nashville there in western Tennessee, to give you a little geographical picture there. So Holly Lynn Bobo was born on October 12, 1990. She lived at home with her mom, Karen, her father, Dana, and her older brother, Clint. So Clint at this time was 25. They were a very close-knit family. They were well respected in their small community. Decatur County had an approximate population of 11,000 in 2011, and that's for the entire county. So it's small. I mean, when I talk to you about it being rural, 11,000 for the entire county is very small numbers there. Holly was attending the University of Tennessee at Martin in nearby Parsons, and she was studying, like I said, to be a nurse. And on the morning of April 13th, 2011, an event took place that would be the largest or lead to the largest and most expensive and exhaustive investigation in Tennessee history. So that morning, on the 13th of April, Holly had woken early to prepare for an exam that she was having later that day. And by early, I mean she was up at 4 a.m. And those exams are no joke. I can say that as a nurse, and this is what she was studying to do. So her mother was an elementary school teacher. She left for work a bit later in the morning, and so did her father, Dana. But not before Mom packed her a lunch, and her dad asked her if she needed any gas money and slipped a 20 in her wallet. All right. So again, like super loving family, kind of taking care of her while she's trying to get through school. So not long after this, their lives changed in a very horrific way. Just before 7:30, so Holly has been up all morning studying, right? So since the break of dawn, just before 7:30, Holly's boyfriend, Drew Scott, texted her. Now, Drew was out turkey hunting that morning and had gotten the okay to hunt at Holly's grandmother's property. But someone was out at that property and kind of gave him a bit of hassle about being on the land. Not the grandmother, just probably a neighbor, someone around who knew that he didn't necessarily belong there. So he was texting Holly, kind of confirming that it was okay that he was out there. He didn't want any trouble. So Holly called her mom at 7:30 just to kind of tell her what was going on with Drew. And her mom, Karen, said, no, of course, Drew can hunt there anytime at all. It's perfectly fine. So Holly texted Drew back at 7:43 that morning. So this is going to be the last text that Holly ever sends. Okay. And so I'm telling you these times because we know she woke up at 4, she was studying, mom leaves for work, dad leaves for work. And then these kind of quick succession of texts and phone calls occur between like 7:30 and 7:43. So at 7:46 a.m., so just 3 minutes after she texts Drew, so she's heading out the door, right? Because I believe, I can't remember if it was 8 or 8:30 when her class started, but either way, she was to be rushing on out at this point. A neighbor named John Farmer was getting in his truck to go to work. 7:46 a.m. All right. He heard a woman scream, and he actually, most sources will just say he heard a woman scream, but when you look into it, what he heard were actually words. He heard someone screaming, "No, stop it. GD, stop it, stop it." And he says everything went quiet immediately after that. As he drove past Holly's house, he looked in the direction of the scream, but he saw nothing. I will continue to remind you how rural of an area, excuse me, that we're talking about here, okay? So this is a nearby neighbor. Outside of that, there weren't a lot of people right around that vicinity. So he saw nothing as he drove by the house, but he did go in and call his mother. He kind of had to get off to work. He had like his ex-wife with him and his 3-year-old kiddo. So not really sure what that situation was there. Doesn't really matter. But either way, he kind of quickly made a phone call to his mom just to let somebody know that he heard something very out of place there. So a few things are going to be happening at one time here. On people, we talk about this often, like you have one timeline, but every person within this time is experiencing a different, portion of their perception of the event, right? So he tells his mom, and this was about 7:47, so immediately after the scream. Everything known shows that Holly walked out to her car at 7:45 a.m., and we can talk about how we have that more specific time. She was somehow attacked or subdued, and she was abducted, okay? But her brother Clint was sleeping soundly inside and did not know any of this was going on. So Clint said that he woke to Holly's dog barking inside the house. He said that the dog continued to bark. I think he kept trying to go back to sleep, right? But the dog is kind of continuing on. So he decides to go on and get up. He kind of peeps out the kitchen window. He was specifically looking for any cars in the driveway, on the street. I think particularly when you live anywhere, but especially kind of a rural area like that, like, a car comes in the driveway, a dog may not be as accustomed to it. They're going to start barking. But Clint did not see any cars anywhere. So he decides to kind of walk around and peep out a different window. And at this time, he realizes that he's hearing voices coming from the area of the carport. A carport is an area where it's literally where you pull your car into. It's kind of like a garage that's not enclosed, right? So it's just like a covered area, usually, not always, usually attached to the house, and you just kind of pull in and it stays covered there. So he looks out the window that peers into the carport, and he said that when he looked out, he saw Holly and a man somewhat squatted down just outside that window, just inside the carport. All right. Continue to keep in mind that Clint has just woken up. Like, he's barely got, his eyes are bleary. He's got one eye kind of open, because Clint does face quite a bit of criticism in the months and years following kind of his reaction to these events. But he had just literally rolled out of bed. So he says that he sees Holly and a guy kind of squatting down. He later goes on to clarify more like in almost like a catcher's type position, kind of facing each other. Okay. So he said that he could hear Holly crying, and his first thought was that Holly and Drew were in an argument, her boyfriend. Okay. He said that he saw camouflage, and he knew that Drew was going hunting that morning. But the miscommunication was that he didn't understand that Drew was already hunting miles away at their grandmother's house. He had not gotten clarification that Drew was not, like when he was hunting, where he was hunting. He just saw camo. Holly's crying. It wouldn't make sense that it would be anybody else, really, in this particular morning. So he didn't want to interrupt what he believed to be a serious moment between Holly and Drew. And then we later learned that he and Drew were good friends. Like, he was very close with Holly's boyfriend. Like I tell you that Clint receives criticism about this or not going out there right then. He has no reason, wouldn't you agree, to suspect that something terrible is happening in that moment. So it was around this time that Clint called his mom. So he wondered if Holly was actually going to go to school that day or not, because he knew she did have a big test coming up. But again, he didn't want to interrupt their moment, right? So when he calls her, he didn't get in touch with her because she left her phone in the classroom. Remember, she's a teacher, and she was elsewhere in the school at this time. So she doesn't see Clint's initial call. So Karen gets Clint's message and calls home eventually, and she tells Clint that that's not Drew with Holly. So remember, Karen has already spoken with Holly that morning because she knew for a fact, Karen knew that Drew was at her mother's property to hunt miles away. So when Clint says this about Holly and some guy in the carport, she's like, oh, that's not Drew. Like, that couldn't be Drew. This feels weird. So again, he's just woken up. So mom will later say, because she kind of escalates quickly and she wasn't wrong. And so people have said, why did she know to, call 911 when she did? Or why did she get so alarmed, when Clint told her this? And she says she knew it wasn't Drew immediately, right? Based off of the facts that we just talked about. And just, I don't know if call it mother's intuition, call it whatever. It just didn't seem right. None of this was something that should be taking place in that moment. So at this time, 7:55 a.m. So we're talking about, increments of time of like 2 to 3 minutes for the next timestamp that we have. Karen calls 911 from school, but since her school is in a neighboring county, she gets the wrong dispatch. Mm-hmm. So there are so many small, unfortunate things like this that occur very early on. And we're talking within 3 to 6 minutes of all of these events taking place that potentially could have, and I hate saying these kinds of things, it's no one's fault, but it could have changed the outcome, and no one would have known the difference at the time. So around that same time that Karen was calling 911, Clint looked out and saw Holly walking into the woods with the man in the camouflage jacket. So now he's spoken with his mother. He knows that it's not Drew that she's with. So he calls Holly's cell phone and he gets her voicemail. So he calls Drew's phone and gets the same result. Karen calls home once more to talk to Clint, and he tells her what he just saw. And she screams, "That's not Drew, Clint. She isn't with Drew. Go get a gun and shoot him." Now, okay. Clint will say later that the misconception, again, we're talking within just that he's right. Not even been awake for, just a couple of minutes. And so he says initially he thought, shoot him. Why am I shooting Drew? And it takes a minute to register that she's saying, this is not Drew. Now, in this communication, I think her mom has come back to say she can't remember. I don't know that she clarified with him, no, Drew is hunting at grandmother's house, right? So he's still just kind of on that train in his mind. But she says, that's not Drew, Clint. Get the gun and shoot him. So when she says that, Clint puts on pants and grabs a gun. So he goes, into the bedroom, puts on some warmer pants. This is April, probably a little cool outside, and we don't know how he sleeps. I don't know. Either way. So he goes to get pants and get his pistol. There was a loaded pistol there in the home. So when he walks into the carport, things change quickly for Clint in his mind because he sees a puddle of blood on the concrete near the front of Holly's black Mustang. Okay. This has been described by investigators as fist size or 4 to 5 inches in diameter, but it's about that size of a puddle of blood, which we've talked about bigger ones, but that's a significant amount of blood. Okay. And there were other smaller drops of blood there as well. At 8:05 a.m., the mother of the neighbor who heard the scream, remember John Farmer was driving to work and heard a woman screaming, "No, stop it, stop it." And he called his mom. Well, that lady's now, in front of the home. And so that mother at 8:05 a.m. goes on and pulls into the driveway. When she pulls into the Bobo driveway, she sees Clint emerging from the woods carrying his phone and a gun. He's not wearing a shirt. So all of this tracks. He had said that he went and put on his pants and got the gun. So he's got his phone in one hand, a gun in the other. Clint has also called 911 at this point. So it doesn't take long for the first members of the sheriff's department to arrive. They get on scene right around 8:10 a.m. Around Holly's house, there was over 200 acres of woods. Again, this was a very, very rural area. There's only like one logging road that comes through to spit out onto the main road around there. And just before 9 a.m., two brothers were logging on what's called Joe Holiday Road. Okay, so while all of this was going on, that was just in the minutes before 8 o'clock in the morning. So just before 9 o'clock, these two brothers were switching gears real quick, were logging on Joe Holiday Road. They say that they saw a small black pickup truck driving by. Now, where they were is an area you'd almost never see vehicles passing through. Again, they were there to log. So this isn't a main thoroughfare. It's not where you see just typical civilian cars going back and forth there. It's almost like a work road, like a utility type road. This black truck is slowly driving by, and they noticed a unique characteristic of it, and it had all of like the decals and the make and model were actually painted over. Okay, so the truck was fully black, including any of the decals that would otherwise be, you name it, silver, white, whatever. They say that the man had, quote, feathery, long black hair and was wearing a plain baseball cap that was black. So, like, no writing on it that they noticed. It looked just like an actual plain, generic black baseball cap. The passenger was a female that was wearing a pink shirt and was bent over as though she could have been tying her shoes. She was also blonde. All right. So back at the Bobo home, so just keep those guys in mind because these are some of our original potential witnesses. Back at the Bobo home, police presence was growing rapidly. All right, the local sheriff's department, along with neighboring counties, were showing up. Almost immediately, the TBI, which is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, arrived, and before long, the FBI arrived as well. Now, would you say that's because we hear it was like the local FBI, local to West Tennessee office?
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that that's because we have blood and we have screams of a woman?
Yeah. Basically, all your initial information sounds like it can be corroborated.
So I'm asking blood, that's why the FBI would be showing up?
Yeah, just to give resources. They wouldn't be lead immediately. They would just be resource driven.
Gotcha.
And then that way, if for some reason it led to a kidnapping case in which was over state lines or something, then they'd pick up lead. But,
well, and they weren't too far from right there where Tennessee borders a few states right there. So either way, so now, like I said, we're talking within 2-3 hours. It's huge. The investigators will talk to the point of the volunteers that were showing up. I mean, just a huge presence really, really early on. In the almost kind of like an Aisha Degree situation because they are the same thing like the FBI and huge volunteer presence. Like everyone just showed up immediately. So that's what happened. So Terry Dicus is the name actually of the case agent on Holly's abduction from the TBI. So when you hear me say Terry Dicus, he was the TBI side of investigating. Okay. So he sat down with Clint, Holly's brother, almost immediately to get his statement. Clint explains the morning's events, just like I've told you about. And Clint's description of the abductor was as follows. It says, Clint says that the male was between 5'10" and 6 feet tall. He was barrel-chested, but he had skinny legs. He had black hair over his collar. He had a ball cap. He had on camouflage, and he had on probably some type of work boots. He also remembered Clint heard voices in the carport initially when he thought that Holly was arguing with her boyfriend. And the male's voice, he said, was very deep and raspy, and it sounded like he had smoked for most of his life. Okay? So this is would you consider this a pretty solid description, Ryan, with your history?
Yes. Yeah.
From witness? Okay.
Yeah, especially if you get into details like that, head to toe. You always ask people, like, if you don't remember something about shoes or whatever, that's fine. But if they start getting into, I heard his voice, there was a specific accent, certain words that were used, and then inflection or smoker.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and when you hear smoked most of his life, now we're going to think probably, I'm not thinking of someone who's 20. Right? I'm probably picturing someone maybe a little bit older too with that description. And we do talk about the fact that witness statements can be fallible. Obviously, witness accounts of, ear witnesses or eyewitnesses can be fallible, but he's got a pretty good hold on it. And remember, he wasn't very far from this individual, and he saw him walking out into the woods with his sister. He could pretty fairly well estimate height because he knows his sister's height, right? She wasn't a stranger. This is his sister. She was 5'3". He knew that. So he could kind of estimate what size this man was. Okay. So in saying that to you, while he initially thought, she was talking to Drew, again, he was half asleep, and that would make sense. Once everything came into play, right, and he heard the man's voice, he saw the blood, he realizes now we've got investigators here, like something horrible has happened to his sister. Then he's able to say, actually, when he describes barrel-chested and the height and the weight, that build, he said actually he referenced his cousin. I'll go, spoiler alert, his cousin has nothing to do with anything. He's not implicated in this whatsoever. But he did reference his cousin, saying, actually, he was built just like my cousin, so-and-so. So cousin comes because it's a close family. So he comes because he hears that Holly has been abducted. And so that Terry Dicus I just mentioned, the TBI guy there, investigator, put mom, Karen, Holly's mother, alongside the cousin because mom is exactly Holly's height.
Perfect.
And had them walk through what Clint says it looked like as they walked off into the woods. And Clint confirmed that looked basically like the picture that he saw. So from then on, actually, that investigator was kind of using the size and build of the cousin kind of as a replica whenever he interviewed, potential suspects or anyone else as they start their canvas. Okay, so early on, the detectives realized that she was taken away in a vehicle and not solely on foot because her cell phone was pinging traveling north, and they were able to determine that it was at such a speed that no one was carrying her and running with her or walking beside her. This was definitely taking place in a vehicle. So obviously this is also complicating things early on. So 2 days later, on April 15th, 2011, several miles from Holly's house near Bible Hill Road, Holly's lunchbox was found. Detectives' heart sank when they opened it to find Holly's undisturbed lunch that her mother had packed for her. They also found a SIM card for Holly's phone, and they found receipts for some nursing school payments that she had made. So they're clearly starting to find her belongings that have been discarded somehow. Okay. So early on, the FBI's BAU, remember that's the Behavior Analysis Unit. We talk about them fairly often on the show. It's probably one of my favorite things to talk about, I think. But if you didn't watch certain shows, I know that Criminal Minds always comes to mind. We've referenced that as well, only in the sense of obviously that's fiction, but the whole focus of that show was to highlight the FBI's BAU division, right? And that started years and years ago. Mine Hunters is another one. And they're out of Quantico, Virginia. And so, if you're not familiar, just briefly, their job is to take the victim, look at the victimology, look at the circumstances surrounding whatever event took place, and then they try to formulate a profile of the suspect, of the perpetrator of the crime, based on known patterns and, just kind of things that they've learned from and worked off of. And so when they do, they decide that this is they start talking about an abduction, right? And so they kind of put it in 4 different channels. So it can be like anger or revenge. It can be for money. We talk about money being a motivator a lot. So a profit type abduction, or something that would fall into the lines of sexual gratification. Those, generally speaking, are some of the channels that an abduction would take place under. And when you work through this, you realize Mom immediately says, we don't have any history with, we don't have any enemies. We don't have anyone that should want to enact revenge or anger. And the point that was made as I was reading about this, was that, and if someone was doing that, then you'd think they would know, right? That's when you get either the letter, the ransom, or if it's for profit, or you get a phone call that says, yeah, whatever. However, you're going to know it's because someone was angry with you, or you're going to know it's because they wanted profit. And when none of that seemed to pan out, then it seemed much more likely that we're looking at like a sexual deviant. If that is the case, they say that this is someone who probably doesn't do so well in relationships, doesn't have very great experiences with people, probably raises the hair on the back of your neck if you're kind of in his sights, someone that would make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. They're able to glean a lot of characteristics of this potential abductor or of the abductor based off of the way this took place, the things that were heard, Holly leaving, probably that this was a planned event, probably that Holly had been being watched. And so this is kind of what Terry Dicus takes and runs with from the TBI, because he's relying heavily on what the BAU has to say. And I feel like that is rightfully so. But that's kind of where that starts. And so Terry Dicus mapped out all of the sex offenders in 4 neighboring counties and interviewed them all. There were 97 of them, and obtained physical descriptions and alibis for all of them. So then on April 19th of 2013, so this was 8 days after her abduction, a local registered sex offender named Terry Britt is questioned. He was never charged in the case, but you're going to be hearing a lot more about him before this show is over. So Terry Britt's alibi for that day was that he was with his wife, Janet, all day. Okay, she didn't have work that day. He says that, she works for a local newspaper and that they needed a new bathtub because over time in their bathtub had been like rotting through, floorboards were caving in, and they knew it was time to get a new bathtub. So evidently he's saying that his wife took off work for that day, which she had a pretty significant job within the local newspaper. But so she takes off the day instead of maybe waiting for a weekend, and they are going to go get this emergent bathtub. Ooh, Emergent Bathtub's a good band name.
Can't go wrong with it. Yeah, no, I like it.
So they go to get a new bathtub. And so he says that they go to this first place, like a salvage company, to look at what they had. They weren't happy with what they saw there. So they drive north to a different location to look for a bathtub there. And when they can't find what they need, they ultimately come back to the first place to get the tub. Okay. So we're going to talk about what his alibi looks like about being with his wife all day, because Terry Britt and his wife maintained that they were together all day long on April 11th. Okay. So early on, a friend of Holly's said that a man had been staring at them at a fish fry. So there was like a fish fry, raccoon hunt situation just a few weeks prior to Holly's abduction, and all of this was like a fundraiser to go towards St. Jude. So it happened every year. It was a big deal. And St. Jude, if you're not familiar, is a pretty amazing hospital, and they deal mainly in pediatric oncology, but other things as well. And it's out in West Tennessee. And so that's where all of this money goes for this. So this is where Holly and a friend were. And she says that a man had been staring at she and Holly. So a sketch artist rendered her description, and Holly's mother was able to get a booking photo of who they believed it to be. They thought it was a man named Shane Austin. So I'm going to show you. You guys, if you're just listening on audio streaming, and so you can't see this on YouTube, I will put all these pictures on the Andrea Uplate Instagram page after probably tomorrow. So you'll be able to see what I'm talking about and who I reference here. Before I forget, let me at least just show you a photo first. This is a photo of Holly and her boyfriend, Drew. So beautiful. She's blonde with blue eyes. And again, she was 20 years old at the time of her disappearance. Okay. So when I told you that the friend said that a guy was looking at them, this is this is the sketch that was rendered, and this is the guy that she said was looking at them. Okay. So pretty similar in appearance, I would say. But his name is Shane Austin. Okay. So I'm going to give you 4 names over the course of this that all of them have last names that start with an A. So you may want to get your whiteboard out, pencil and paper, whatever you got. So they kind of start looking into this, but this is what sets, I would say, outside of Terry Dicus with the TBI, because we're going to see kind of a division here. And this is what sets the rest of the investigators off on the path that they are then to proceed down. Okay. So Shane Austin, he worked at a nearby adult bookstore. He said he was home all day the day of Holly's abduction because he had been drinking Benadryl for bug bites. Okay, I never said that these are upstanding members of society. The TBI, FBI, and dog handlers searched his home. So they searched it in and out. He lived in a mobile home, and absolutely nothing was found to indicate that he had anything to do with Holly's disappearance. But this led to Shane Austin's friend, Zach Adams. So it's almost like dominoes. So once they start talking to Shane Adams, again, this was based off of a friend's account that he'd been looking at them funny at a fish fry, okay? Not to say it shouldn't be looked into. Obviously it should. But that's kind of how all of this starts, because I myself, in studying for this case, had to keep going back to say, wait a minute, how did we get on these 4 guys? Like, I kind of had to keep reminding myself how that happened. So Zach Adams is a friend of Shane Austin's. And so I'm going to read to you what Zach says is his, bear with me now, because this is where I'm going to reference. So Terry Dicus, the TBI investigator, wrote a book about Holly Bobo's abduction in the years since. And so when I tell you I'm referencing the book, that's the book I'm talking about. So I definitely want to give him credit for this. But I'm going to tell you here, do you have anything to speak on in terms of what the investigation looks like so far?
Yeah, when you said that about like you had to keep going back to how did we get on these guys? Any investigation goes that way.
Okay.
Like it's like, you're following these tips or this information, your crime scene, and then you get one lead, and then that may lead into a group of people or multiple people. And then you got to kind of go back sometimes when you're like halfway through it and going, how the hell did we end up on this dude when we started with this other guy? This is not always the perfect example, but it would be when vehicles are utilized, stuff like that, where you start off with a vehicle owner and then you move to who was actually driving.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
Okay. So let me tell you so the 4 names we're going to be talking about, guys, I'm just going to say them all now, and then we're just going to keep referencing them. But I told you about Shane Austin first. He's probably going to be the least of who we speak of. Zach Adams is who we're talking about right now. We're going to talk about his brother, Dylan Adams, and then another friend of theirs called Jason Autry, who they reference as the A Train, and we'll talk about why they do that. So Zach's alibi is that, so he was interviewed during the first week of Holly's abduction. And again, I'm reading this out of Terry Dicus's book. He supposedly woke up on the morning of April 13th, 2011, sometime after 9:30 a.m. Okay. Listen, the timestamps that we're looking at, or that the investigators were looking at, is anywhere between 7:45 a.m. and 9:25 a.m. Because we know about Holly texting with her boyfriend, her mom, and then the abduction, right? We have all of those times because we have Clint that eyewitnessed her walking into the woods with this man. And then her phone does a lot of things that we'll talk about, and it pings in certain locations for X amount of time until it finally stops any activity at 9:25 a.m. So the way they look at it is that if any of these people they interview couldn't have been where her phone was between 7:45 a.m. and 9:25 a.m., then they were likely not anyone who had anything to do with this. Okay? Because her phone is moving around. And that's kind of how this initially started. So he says that he woke up sometime after 9:30. So based on the parameters I just gave you, he's already out. Like, this has already taken place. Okay. But his girlfriend, who provided his alibi, had to be at work at the video store in Parsons by 10 o'clock that morning. So that's 10 to 15 minutes away from Zach's house. So when she left, Zach Adams and his brother Dylan were still at the residence, sleeping. Okay. Dylan was still asleep and Zach was still there. So Holly Bobo was kidnapped, like I said, at exactly 7:45 a.m. on that morning. So that would have been 2 hours before Zach Adams got up. Okay. So that is Zach's alibi. I'm going to go on and get rid of that so I don't read it to you again. And that's important. Okay. The reason that's important is because Zach is actually the only one who's been convicted of the murder of Holly Bobo. Okay. So not to short circuit that there and get all the way around to that, we're going to explain why he was. But it's important to read these 4 guys' alibi first. And then we'll talk about the events that then did take place. All right. So they talk to Zach Adams. This is what they get from him. Then they go next to a friend of Zach's named Jason Autry. Now, remember, I told you that his friends referred to him as the A Train. That is because Jason Autry was about 6 feet, 6 inches tall and over 200 pounds. This is a big dude. And he also wasn't, the most upstanding citizen. I think he could intimidate people pretty easily. And, these guys, all 4 of the ones that I'm talking about now, we're looking at like morphine tablets, like pill heads, meth heads, whatever. Now, we also talk about it. Can you be a creep and not a murderer? Or in this case, can you be just kind of floating around in life and doing these other things with not, a real goal and also not be a murderer? Of course. But maybe they were. So I'm going to let you see what you think about that. But now they've moved on to Jason Autry, okay, A Train. So they go speak to him while he lives with his mother. Big boy. These aren't little bitty children either. I mean, they're in their early 20s. And he immediately did not fit the description. Remember Clint's very detailed description of the person who abducted his sister. He said between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, and around 200 pounds. This guy would tower over 5'3" Holly. Okay. So we're going to read Jason Autry's alibi now and let you see what he says when investigators first interview him. He says, yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you. Okay, so this is also like a confident dude in the sense that he had been in the shower when the TBI gets there with the local sheriff's deputy, and he just comes out to sit and talk to them wearing nothing but a towel. Okay, so he's not highly intimidated in this moment, I would say. He says, yeah, I'd be glad to talk to you. That day, I was working on a farm in Benton County. I'll give you the name and telephone number of my boss. I came into Decatur County much later that day and met up with Zach Adams and Shane Austin. So those are the guys we referenced a minute ago. He goes on to say, hey, look, I know Holly Bobo. She's like my third cousin. If I knew anything to help you boys, I'd tell you in a heartbeat. You boys, right? So he's definitely not intimidated here. There's nobody I wouldn't turn in for $85,000. I need the money. I'd be driving a new truck and not living with my mom if I had anything to tell you. And they said they felt pretty confident that when he told them that, he seemed like they didn't sense any signs of deception there, just with the way he carried himself and spoke. And they felt pretty quickly because they told them, at this time, the reward was $85,000. And I believe Terry Dykas's words to the people he interviewed were literally kind of, I'll put a check in your pocket for $85,000 if you got something here. And he said, I didn't think for a minute this guy wouldn't take the money and run if he had an option to, turn someone in or to have any information here.
I'd have pitched him right then to be an informant for other drug stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, there you go.
He just let you know, I'd do it, but I don't have a lead.
Right. And so they were able to follow up with his boss and it checked out. He was at work where he said he was miles and miles away that morning. His phone records corroborate what he said, in terms of calling his buddy Zach and when he came back into town, his cell phone pings. We'll talk about the AT&T cell phone dump that they were able to get and that's how we know so many of these things corroborate what these guys are saying. Okay. So a lot of this comes down to, and there were hours of expert witness testimony on cell phones and pinging and geolocation and these kinds of things. And some of the more recent courtroom of the trials that were taking place. But basically, within these 3 towers that they talk about all the time, sometimes it's a problem in a rural area because we can't narrow some things down depending on what they're looking for. In this particular case, it has been said that actually it helped to triangulate things with it being such a rural area because other towers didn't get in the way and confuse people's alibis, confused what they were saying, where their phones were. So it wasn't like you had overlapping, and it could have been, within this region or this region, because it overlapped almost like a Venn diagram, right, of where your phone could be. So with this, they're able to take what everyone's witness statements are, or, alibis are, and see if they're, being honest with this or not. So that was Jason Autry's alibi, A-Train. Okay. So I told you about the BAU's profile of what they think the abductor would be like his characteristics. So when you think about so far these guys we've talked to, we're not really hitting. Two of them had very long-term girlfriends. These dudes were always at bars, always around town, knew a lot of people. This doesn't tend to make you think of the kind of loner a little bit, or someone who makes people feel awkward necessarily. We haven't yet had any women to come forward to say that that's how they felt in the presence of these guys, other than the first girl who said she thought Shane had been looking at them at the fish fry. But that's kind of as strong as that first hint was. Okay. So all geocellular cell location and call records put Jason Autry in Benton County, not where Holly was, like I said, during the times of 7:45 to 9:25 that morning. And that's what I told you was the times that her phone was active, moving around. All right. So back to Shane Austin, the first guy that we just talked about from the fish fry. His words about that morning, again, out of this book, his words, let me get to it for you guys. 1 second. I apologize, but I want to make sure I'm not reading you something I've already read. And so Shane Austin says, I got up sometime around 10 that morning. I spoke to Zach Adams, and we decided to go get some pills and get messed up. So remember, he's now past the time of when Holly's phone quit working and way past her abduction time. If what he's saying is true, he was sleeping during all of that. I spoke to Zach Adams. We decided to get pills, get messed up. Zach came and picked me up in Dylan's truck. We went to, remember, Zach and Dylan are brothers, okay? We went up to the convenience store by the interstate. That's where we were when we saw a bunch of government vehicles coming down the interstate and turning south on Highway 641. We didn't know what was going on. So Terry Dicus goes on to say that that's the timestamp they had at this convenience store, and that the crew investigators were coming from Jackson, that's west of that area on the interstate. And he's saying that that would make sense, that that's the part of the highway they'd be coming down from the interstate at that point. And that timeline would be about right as to when these kind of extra forces were coming in to help out. So Shane Austin goes on to say, when we then went into Parsons, and that's when we found out about Holly Bobo being kidnapped. We bought the pills and we got messed up. All right. So that's really like his day. Remember, he said he was home from work that day. So at first it sounds like, oh, he doesn't really have an alibi because he was home from work conveniently, right? He said he had his words where he was drinking Benadryl because of bug bites. I think he was just waiting until his next fix. So they were going to go get pills. That was their plan for that day, was to literally go, quote, get messed up. That's what he said. So that's Shane Austin's account. So that's 3 of the 4 guys that I've told you had been early on kind of implicated in this, from at least all the investigators outside of the TBI agent, Terry Dicus. I am still deleting these as we speak. Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. When I'm doing this, if you have anything you want to...
Well, basically, I would say when people cooperate in an investigation and start admitting, hey, we're involved in drugs, or we're involved in this or whatever. Usually, I'm not saying all the time, but usually that's a good indicator. You're like, okay, we're starting to get to the truth, at least, to get a timeline to figure out where they were on that day.
Yeah. And it's actually, what is that? That's actually a great point. Because we've talked before where people come up looking deceptive because they may not be super honest with investigators about their alibi, but it's not because they did whatever the crime was in question. It's because they were doing something else illegal that they didn't really want to talk about. So maybe they don't want you digging into the fact that they were doing drugs or doing anything else, right? Or having an affair even, or whatever. Yeah. And so maybe they're not honest, when they should be, because they didn't actually do that bad thing. These guys were all straight up like, oh, no, I slept late, call my boy, we're going to get some pills and do whatever. But you've got to think, these guys were all spoken to within quick succession of each other. Not to say they couldn't corroborate a story, but They all kind of have a different time that they woke up, a different time. It's not
Yeah.
exactly picture perfect carbon copy, but it lines up. Like the actual timestamps of what they say lines up with each other. And again, their cell phones did corroborate it. So that's definitely good to keep in mind. So the TBI detectives made their way over to Zach Adams' house. Remember, I told you that he had said about being, woken up at around 9:30. Now, Zach Adams was 6'2" and about 135 pounds, so very tall and lanky. If you're 6'2" and 135, you don't have much meat on your bones, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to show you some of these guys real quick. Again, you can find these things, these photos on Instagram on the Andrea Update page. So here we have, this is Zach Adams, okay? So this is the guy that was found to have been, actually was convicted in Holly's murder. This is the one who says his girlfriend, or she says, and everything corroborates it, that she went to work at the video store about 10 o'clock that morning, about 10 or 15 minutes from his house. She had slept over with him. He woke up around 9:30 or after. His brother was still asleep, and they all agree to all of this. I showed you Shane Austin. Here's Jason Autry, the one they call A-Train. Also, in real life, like outside of these photos, their hair looks a little bit lighter than it does here. I don't think you'd consider any of them to have black hair as what was Clint's description. And either way, also his hair was, he said, longer and over the collar, over the ears. And then there again is Zach Adams. Okay, here just for funsies is a photo of, that's blurry, that's cute, Holly in her outfit, her nursing outfit. Okay, this is a photo of the blood that her brother found in the carport right there in front of her car. So you can see what I mean. Actually, this, it's a bad comparison. It actually almost looks like an apple in size and shape when you look at it on the concrete there. So picture about an apple, which would be about right. They said about this size. And if you look closely, you can see a few other drops kind of surrounding that. I was seeing if that looked like it was on the car as well. So that's kind of a picture of what we have there. Okay. So they also spoke with Zach's brother, Dylan Adams, who really didn't have much else to say. Of note, I don't know Dylan's IQ. I will say that Dylan was like in special education classes his whole life, and his mother will corroborate to say that he's, kind of lower IQ, kind of, I don't think she considered him like special needs necessarily, but she did feel like you can't trust that if he's with someone for so long, he may not be easily molded into saying certain things. But so keep those 4 men in mind because this does get wild. Like I said, so Zach Adams evidently keeps talking about Holly Bobo. So we talk about this. People like to run their mouths sometimes. So whether he did this or not, he makes it sound to people, here he is again, like that's Jason, that he was complicit in this, okay? So even though his alibi makes it impossible for him to be the one, and it checks out, and this is the first thing he tells investigators, and they're able to follow up on this quickly. Even though his alibi checks out, he couldn't have done it. He tells people, so he says things like, if you don't, he told his ex-girlfriend, like, if you keep running your mouth, I'm going to tie you up and do to you what I did to Holly Bobo, and just stuff like this kind of around town. Okay. But at this point, while other investigators are looking at him and these other 3 guys, again, Terry Dicus is narrowing in on Terry Britt, the guy, remember the bathtub guy, who he and his wife were together all day long, shopping for a bathtub that whole day. He couldn't have done it, right? But 3 years after Holly's abduction, and with no body, like no remains, no weapons, arrests were made in Holly Bobo's case. Okay, so I'm going to read to you the dates exactly. Let me see, I have them right here. So Zach Adams was arrested on March 5th of 2014. So remember, Holly went missing in April of 11. So almost exactly 3 months later, 3 years later, they arrested Zach Adams. Now, on like a month after that, Jason Autry was arrested. So they're going through this group of the 4 guys. And so we've got to wonder, what in the world evidence do we have? What causes them to go down this path to start arresting these guys? And then we have literally a couple months after that, this other set of like half brothers were arrested. Charges were dropped on them. So it does feel a little bit like these charges are happening a little bit rapidly in succession, to the point that they had to drop these other unfounded charges on these other 2 guys. Okay. So Zach Adams was arrested. We really only have circumstantial stuff here. There's not a lot to go off of when it comes to Zach's arrest 3 years after Holly's disappearance. And again, her body has not been found at this point.
So let me interrupt.
Yeah.
Circumstantial and no decedent.
No decedent. No remains have been found. Because, guys, we talk about, if there are no remains, you can make an arrest and potentially secure a conviction when no remains have been found. But would you agree that it has to have hard evidence?
Yeah.
Or just full admission?
Well, like the incident is on video. You've recovered a large amount of blood from the scene that you can confirm is the victim's blood, that you could do the calculations and say basically they had to have bled out. Only the body was removed from that location. Something like that. You don't just go off of, I mean, we're talking 2011. That's not that long ago in the criminology world, right, or in the forensics. Right. And yeah, I'm surprised at that they would charge on circumstantial and nobody.
Yeah.
But I did make some notes earlier about media pressure and stuff. But you go right ahead.
Well, now I will say, so that is the criticism, is that, this is a big deal. Like I said, it was the most expensive, exhaustive investigation in Tennessee to date. So there were some, and like, you guys have heard me say I'm from Tennessee, like around the Nashville area. And, and I remember it was constant. I mean, every time you turn on the news, it'd be like, no new leads or new suspects talked to. In the case of Holly Bobo, it was constant. And I mean, and for good measure, I mean, that was a good thing, but I'm just saying, the billboards, the signs, it was everywhere. You couldn't go down Interstate 40 without seeing Holly's face, And so when you talk about public pressure and things like that, I hate to say that like a department would cave and arrest on these things, but I do think that these guys were up to no good around town a whole lot, and that didn't make them look better in the eyes of those investigators. But it's tough. I will say, on a side note, though, that Terry Dicus, that I've been kind of reading excerpts from his book and telling you about him from the TBI, while he kept narrowing down onto Terry Britt, eventually, though, he was close with Holly's family. He said that he had, all 97 registered sex offenders, alibis, and physical locations memorized at the drop of a hat. If somebody needed to know about one of them, he could tell you exactly where they were that day at that time, and if it checked out, and then cross-referencing everything. He said they looked into all of Holly's ex-boyfriends to 3rd grade. I mean, there's no stone unturned here. But evidently other members within the TBI began to feel that Terry Dicus was, quote, too close to the case. And some considered him to have tunnel vision with Terry Britt. I think conversely, some could say that they think that the other investigators had tunnel vision with these group of 4 druggies. So I think that could go either way. But, either way, by 2013, Terry Dicus was then no longer on Holly's case as an investigator. Okay. But what we're going to be talking about this last half of the show is the work he did moving forward with Terry Britt, while everyone else was concentrating on Travis, Dylan, Shane, and Jason. Okay. And it's going to, if that blew your mind, what I just told you a moment ago, this is wild. So in September of 2014, local ginseng hunters, do you guys know about ginseng? You can find it out in the woods. I feel like it's still illegal to hunt, but either way, whatever. These guys were out looking for ginseng and found a skull. Okay. As they looked a little bit closer, there were more bones. These were confirmed to be those of Holly Bobo. All right, so in total, they found a skull, teeth, several ribs, and one shoulder blade. The skull did have a bullet hole entrance wound to the back right side of the skull and an exit wound in the left cheek. All right. So that would be, and I think they said it was around 36 millimeters wide. So if you're looking at a bullet size or trying to identify a weapon, that would be your sizing there. So this was, this was about 3.5 years after Holly went missing is when her remains were finally found. Again, vast areas of forest, woods, rural. I mean, just it's a lot to look through. So the 4 guys. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about, let's see here. We're going back to Terry's book when he talks about the four men that I've been referencing. So let me get to the right. Do you want to talk about any of the notes you wrote?
Yeah, a lot of it, like you and I have kind of been talking about this case a little bit more than probably most of the cases we do.
Yeah. Well, because we may not have had a show for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but this has been the only thing I think we've talked about.
Yeah. And kind of talking about that, about normally you have to kind of not beat it over my head, but like, hey, Brian, not everybody is 100% on board, or hey, sometimes they get the investigations wrong, that sort of thing. So far, everything that you and I've talked about before tonight, the kind of the overarching theme was always interviews, evidence, and then the two should be the same. Like the statements should be the exact same with the evidence, and the details should add up. Also, I kind of jotted down a little formula.
Okay.
The more suspects you have involved, plus, and when I say suspects, like group of people you like think you are going to charge or you have charged. So actual suspects in a crime that operate as a group, plus heinous details equals BS usually. The more people involved and the more heinous the crime, unless you can prove it, is usually BS. Meaning just because someone says that should be a huge red flag. Because one person is capable of doing really horrible things. But in the criminal world, it's hard for one person who commits heinous things like that to then find another person similar to that, and then they work in tandem. I mean, we know it's happened. I'm not saying it's impossible. But then you start adding 3, 4, 5 people. And
who were in and out, like on drugs, have weapons charges, like their minds aren't always right. They could implicate each other if they wanted to.
Right. And so then if you take a group like that and you're saying they are doing these multiple assaults or essays, for days at a time, and then ending somebody, that's kind of hard. A lot of times that's kind of like those red flags. Like, this is a little too Hollywood-like. Like a lot of this is not jiving. Unless you tell me that all 5 of them have years and years of the similar charges like that and histories like that. Like you've heard me talk about the house I had on my beat where sex offenders actually lived. Like 5 of them lived there. They were rooming houses. Now that could be possible because you get like-minded people together. But if you get 4 or 5 people together that just have a history of petty crimes, some drug selling, low IQ, that sort of thing, and you've got a great witness, you've got a crime scene, you've got a person who is not, your victim is not involved in crime, and has a pattern of behavior every day that you can track. And the suspect or the crime is described as a lone suspect and voice and all that. I don't know how you end up with these. I mean, I know how you just mentioned it, but like how as investigators they
well,
stuck
and
with
it's
these
noted
guys.
that, for instance, Zach Adams, the one actually convicted in Holly's murder, if anything, had more of a higher pitched voice for a man. Now, again, witness statements can be fallible in terms of their eyewitness accounts, but Clint was right there when it happened.
Mm-hmm.
He heard a voice outside of his window. He immediately described it as deep and raspy, as though someone had smoked most of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that fully contradicts not only the size, the shape, the height, the build of any one of these guys, but also then the, their voices. Like, none of them sounded like this.
Yeah.
So, so get this. So evidently, I'm reading back again from Terry Dicus's book. We've got two Terrys we're talking about tonight, so they're very, very different.
Sorry, that was a fun.
Yeah, so I had to think about that. So he goes on to say that a very unusual plea agreement was reached by Dylan Adams. Remember, this was the guy who was noted, had a notably low IQ and is Zach Adams, the convicted's brother. Okay, so get this. This was by the United States Attorney's Office. So Dylan committed a burglary and was indicted in federal court with a weapons charge that carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 120 months. So 10 years, right? His minimum sentence is going to be 10 years in prison. Dylan Adams was released to the custody of a retired Memphis police officer. So listen to this. He was kind of given this promise of immunity, and he was paroled out or bonded out or whatever. But his instructions were such that even his mother was not allowed to talk to him. Now, I understand that we can specify, you kind of have different parameters depending on the person, the crime, what your bond agreement is going to be. I've never heard of this. And so tell me if you have. This is bizarre to me, because mother couldn't come visit him. No one else could talk to him. But he had to, like, under his, not parole, under his bond, like when he's out on bond, he has to live with this retired police officer for about 5 weeks and basically can't have any other outside contact. He says later on, as time has gone by, that basically every single day he was asked about the day that Holly went missing. Every single day he's asked more about it. He's told more about what that day probably looked like. Every day. Hounded. Okay. And so also keep in mind, he's got charges he probably wants to work off, right? Because now he's got a 10-year sentence he's facing. All right. So when that happens, he lives for 5 weeks with this retired police officer. And after this, he then, quote, like, confesses. So after all that time, after everything anyone had asked him about, he now confesses, and his information is what led to the arrest of his brother, Zach Adams, Jason Autry, and his own self for the kidnapping, murder, and rape of Holly Bobo. So he's got this federal prison sentence hanging over his head. It's important to note that the TBI collected over 500 pieces of evidence from Zach and Dylan Adams' house. Over 500. Nothing corroborated a rape scene. Dylan showed the spot where he says Holly was raped repeatedly, and they found a lot of DNA, but none of it was Holly's. Okay? So when he has this charge over his head, let's see here. And he's living. Have you ever heard of someone bonded out and their agreement is that they have to, or their rules is they have to live with a retired law enforcement officer?
The only thing I can even think of, and this is just off the top of my head, because states usually don't have like protective custody the way like U.S. Marshals have WITSEC for federal witnesses or federal cooperators or whatever. States usually don't have it, or a lot of them don't. I don't know if that was their way of saying basically this person's vouching for this cooperator, basically is what he is, for however many weeks. I don't know. It's kooky. I don't fully
Well, it's kind
know
of
why.
like, how people watched and got so engrossed in Making of a Murderer.
Yes.
And that one kid is like a bit younger and like a bit more challenged mentally there and, or intellectually, I should say. This is I don't know. It doesn't make me feel very comfortable with how it went down.
No, and usually what happens, you sit down, you talk for a couple of hours, you get all those details out, and then you can go back and ask follow-up details like, hey, when you were talking about the car, whatever. But it sounds like
he came right out of living with that guy and has a full-on story now, and also charges to work off. Okay, so Dylan said that they kept Holly alive for 3 days and took turns assaulting her. Please keep in mind, though, that house, they say that they took a piece of flooring out of that house that's bigger than a car, where he pointed to saying that that's where she had been assaulted. But none of her DNA was found. Also, with like either Blue Star or luminol, you know, whatever they used, no indication of any cleaning had taken place. Okay, so they couldn't find that anything had been cleaned. And then, you know, and none of Holly's DNA was found there. All right. So that's what Dylan had to say. And Dylan is the one that really, him saying that, coming back from living with that cop, saying this whole new story now after all of this time, when, by the way, he never said that he killed her. He said his brother did. He could have early on potentially gotten some money and maybe, you know what I mean, kept himself out of trouble early on in the situation had he wanted to, if that were the case. So then let's go on, because when I told you that he says that, and that just has that chain of dominoes that fall, because then that's, you know, Zach Adams is arrested, Jason Autry, A-Train, is arrested. Now, Shane Austin was not arrested. Okay. Shane Austin is the original guy, the kind of redhead, heavyset guy I showed you, that had potentially maybe been looking at Holly and a friend at the fish fry prior. Again, doesn't match the witness's description, none of that doesn't follow in with the BAU's description of the, you know, the suspect. He had a kind of troubled life. So years prior, he had had a really bad motorcycle accident, which led to some surgeries and some facial disfigurement. It caused his eye to droop, a big scar on his face. His mom and dad say that caused him kind of a tough time mentally over the years. That was mixed with the fact that he already had been an addict. And again, when I talk about addict, I'm talking about one of these guys was mentioning taking a morphine pill, crushing it up, mixing it with meth, using a cotton ball as a filter, injecting it in the arm. Like, we're talking about a lot of stuff. Okay. So he had a pretty significant history with drugs for years and years and years. Mom said he had battled depression and just body image stuff, I guess, with the big scar on his face after the motorcycle wreck. And then he had gone to work down around this time. He had gone and taken a job down in Florida, I think with a brother-in-law or a friend. Either way, when that other person came back into town, he just stayed down there, and he actually ultimately committed suicide. So again, he did not have charges on him in Holly Bobo's case. But as these guys start talking, his name is kind of, because he's always just with this group of guys. And his mom says it has nothing to do with Holly Bobo, just that he had been in a bad place for a long time already. And that potentially with the pressure of some of this stuff, or like talking about it or putting pressure to him, that could have, you know, been a bad thing, but not because she feels like he was actually complicit in any of this. You know, who's to say he's gone? He did not leave a note. He didn't leave a note saying that he had done any of these things. But again, I want to keep reminding you of when I gave you all of their alibis when they were first talked to within the first few days of Holly's disappearance, when they didn't have pending charges that they wanted to work off, and weren't sitting there facing, you know, big federal prison sentences. When they were just kind of kicking it home, they all had alibis quickly. All those alibis were corroborated by girlfriends, bosses, phone records, geolocations, etc. No DNA of theirs was found on Holly's stuff, and none of Holly's was found in their homes. Okay, so these are big things to think about when we see them sitting there facing charges, with potentially the promise of working those off by admitting to something that they may or may not have done. Okay, so let's go on and get to Jason Autry's account, A-Train. So he says, it says that it's about 3 days it took to get a certain version of the story out of Jason Autry. This is what you've got to understand. Once they all kind of were charged in this and came forward like admitting or confessing that they had done this, still none of their stories added up. Their stories added up better when they said they didn't do it. When they're saying that they did, they're all talking about themselves and the others, and all of their stories are different. Like, none of it lines up. Okay. So at first, Jason Autry says that Zach told him that he went to teach Clint how to make meth. There's never been an indication that Clint is making meth, that Clint is friends with Zach.
Mm-hmm.
They said that they didn't even actually really know each other. So I don't know why Zach would be going to Clint's house that morning. And so that when Holly threatened to call the police, Zach kidnapped her. And so over something like that, you know what I mean? He's going to kidnap her, hold her, abduct her, rape her and murder her, right? So then the next story that Jason Autry said was that Zach actually went over to pick Holly up because she'd been come over to Zach's house smoking meth. None of that lines up with anything that Holly had been doing.
Right.
So then finally, when you see what Jason had said from the beginning, that he had nothing to do with any of this. His alibi was that he was in that county kind of far away when Holly went missing. His boss corroborated, oh yeah, he was at work all day today. His cell phone records corroborated and everything. But finally he says that Zach called and said that he needed help. And evidently Jason thought that it was to help him cook meth, Zach. So he left to head to Zach's house. And when he got Zach was at Shane Austin's house. And when Jason got to Shane Austin's house to help Zach, he saw Holly wrapped up in a towel, and that Zach wanted Jason to drive with Holly in the back of Zach's white truck to a certain exit off of the interstate. And then Jason says he noticed that Holly was still alive, and Zach walks over and shoots her in the head. Well, by now, Holly's remains have been found. By now, we know that she had a bullet to her head, to her skull. Okay? No one said anything about this before her remains were found. But again, when you look at their cell phone records and what he says happened that day now that he's confessing, that doesn't add up. Okay? That doesn't add up at all. So what you need to know about Jason Autry, when he gave this account of the events of that day, he gave the statement to the TBI saying he witnessed Zach shoot Holly. But at this point, he was in jail on weapons charges. He wasn't supposed to have a gun, and he did. So now he's in jail serving time, looking at a pretty big sentence. And he will later say, and this has come out now, when they talk about ineffective counsel, that his lawyer told him basically, like, and all of these guys will say this, that like it was kind of like, if you go to trial over this, you're going to be found guilty. So you better come up with something. So it's between saying you almost have to have a forcible confession there to the murder of Holly Bobo, and then the side note, the sweetened part of the deal, is that you're probably going to get time served or work off the charges that you're facing for your more current crimes that are going on. Let's see here. If you got anything, you can.
Yeah. Anytime, if you tell someone, hey, you're going to be found guilty, like no matter what your guidance is, you're going to be found guilty unless you do this, or like for a while, years ago, detectives would do stuff or cases across the U.S. You see detectives who were like, you're going to do life in prison if you don't start telling me the truth.
Right.
So it's kind of like, okay, then they just start rambling or telling you things that aren't true just because they're petrified that they're going to go to prison for the rest of their life, whether they did it or not.
So at the time that Dylan, who remember was in trouble for burglary and was going to get 10 years, lives with a retired cop for 5 weeks, come back with a whole new story that gets everyone else implicated. And now they start saying things that all don't add up. So Jason Autry, that I just told you about, had been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for unrelated, like I told you, weapons charges. So what was going to happen is that if he testified for the state against Zach Adams, then he was going to be released on time served for Holly, and federal sentence goes away. And so then guess what happens? He finds a story to tell. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's something. Yeah, go ahead.
You and I were talking about this 2 or 3 days ago on the beach, but it was, if a person provides a statement and they're trying to cooperate and whatever, get a sentence reduction, you don't go in and say, here's the deal we're offering you. We'll give you whatever, complete immunity, or we'll give time served if you tell us whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do that. I'm not saying necessarily that's what they did, but it sounded like that.
No, it sounds like that's exactly what happened.
But what you do is you tell, if someone comes forward and says, hey, I know about this case, and they fully say, I want to, work off these charges, or I want, immunity or whatever. You go in there and you say, you tell us what you know, and we'll corroborate, see if it's the truth or not. And then the chips fall where they fall. And so, and attorneys, prosecutors and defense attorneys, they're not going to run a scam on somebody. It's not like in the movies, you don't betray people, but you have to get that information and even see if it's credible. It's crazy to go, oh, well, you're going to get your deal no matter what. You just got to tell us.
Right. Yeah. Especially when a couple of years have gone by. And let's say for Jason Autry, he had the state's discovery. So like now when they say, hey, you can get time served on Holly, your federal charges go away if you pin this on Zach Adams, and he knows exactly what evidence they have, he can do his best to try to make a story. Still doesn't do a great job at it, by the way. Yeah. Let's see here. So then we have Dylan saying all kinds of things. His story changes so many times, and he's the reason that they arrested Zach to even start with. Okay. So then we have, let's see here. So get this. When Zach says that he told Jason Autry he needed help, like I told you, he thought Zach needed help, like with meth, right? So he says that he gets to Shane Austin's house sometime after 9:00 in the morning. Okay, so he's not implicating himself. Remember, he's got to pin this on Zach. Like that's what he was told to do. So he says that the gate at Shane's house was open, and he saw a body wrapped in the quilt in the back of Zach's white Nissan Frontier. So he said that at that same trailer were Dylan Adams and Shane Austin, and that there was a burn barrel with a 4-foot blaze of a fire and the smell of meth ingredients. Now, this is one of his kind of amended statements as to what happened that day. Well, when he says that, that's great. But Shane Austin, who later committed suicide, his mother says, no. That can't be true. There couldn't have been a gate open and a fence there because Shane didn't have a fence or a gate in front of his trailer until about 3 months later when she and his dad got him a puppy. But when, at this time, then Jason is saying, at least for this like confession, if you will, that like the gate was swung wide open, and that's a detail that couldn't have been true. So again, he's working off charges with that stuff. So another thing to pay attention to is that special agent with the TBI, Brent Booth, says that Zach Adams, Dylan Adams, Shane Austin, and Jason Autry were excluded as being the contributor of the palm print that was found on Holly's Mustang. Now, they still don't know whose it is, but let me tell you somebody who could not be excluded, Terry Britt. Okay? It was not conclusively his, but he cannot be excluded while they can't. That can't be, and not that the palm print means anything, but that's just another something that they can't, okay? So I told you about Dylan changing his story. Get this, another thing that Dylan says when he changes his story is that they took Holly to Shane Austin's house and held her in his basement for a few days. Hey, do you remember when I told you that Shane Austin lived in a mobile home? So there wasn't a basement there.
No, okay? They don't have basements. They have underpinning, but they don't have basements.
Yeah, I don't think underpinning is what he meant. But this is after living with that police officer. I don't know, you guys. This gets kind of wild. Okay, I'm sorry for the pauses here. I'm just pulling up other parts of this that I want you to hear before I move on to talking a little bit about Terry Britt before we wrap it up. And then I do want to hear your opinion because some changes have taken place after the conviction of Zach Adams and all of these other weird things that went on with some plea deals in exchange for, we had an Alford plea. If you remember, Michael Peterson, I think, made that a very famous word around, years ago. And that's kind of an Alford plea is like when you it's a guilty plea, but you're maintaining your innocence. Like, you're viewed as guilty in the eyes of the law. You're maintaining your innocence, saying you still didn't do the thing, but you know that the state has enough evidence against you to prosecute. So that's what an Alpha plea is, and that's what I believe Dylan Adams was able to take with all of this. So so get this. So it says, okay, I want you guys to hear this. So sorry. Bear with me, you guys. All right. Jason Autry was in Benton County when Holly's cell phone was in Decatur County. Okay? So he couldn't have been the kidnapper. Zach Adams was on his home tower, like the cell tower for his home, and away from Holly's phone on different towers. He couldn't have been the kidnapper. Austin, all right, Shane Austin was on his home tower, a great distance away around the time Holly's cell pinged at 9:25 a.m. He couldn't have been the kidnapper. And Dylan was the only person who had no cell data, but Dylan was nowhere close to the description of the suspect anyway. And if you believe Zach Adams' girlfriend, who said she left to go to work that morning and they were asleep, then he couldn't have been the kidnapper. Now, Zach Adams' girlfriend also can't stand him. They have since broken up because they got in a big fight, and I think there is some like domestic violence stuff going on. She can't stand him. She hates him. And she's even said, I don't know, maybe he did something like that. But then they're like, well, wait, does your story change? Because you said he was in bed when you left that morning. She was like, oh, no, he was asleep when I left that morning. Mm-hmm. Like, the alibi still stands. So, I mean, with every account, she can't stand the dude. But she's still not saying that, she's not changing her alibi with him. So, let me see. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything before we move on. So this is interesting. The state did object to this, but they had this cell location because about 8 months after Holly's disappearance, AT&T was able to finally provide a full cell phone dump. So that's where they're going to be able to look at any cell phone in and around the areas, any one of those 3 towers. Now, when it comes to those towers, I won't bore you with the science of it, but her phone pinged at the tower that has the certain tower that has what they call 3 faces. And this means that investigators can tell within 120 degrees which face her phone was hitting. That information all gets combined, and this is telling of which direction the phone traveled and where it was found. She had a 2G network at the time. On a 2G network back then, remember, technology, we talk about it often, has changed and grown exponentially since just 2011. But at 2G, you could only find basically what would be the center point of where a phone could be located around all these towers. So not exactly where the phone was located, but like this central point like in the middle.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And this, and if you picture like a big circle, put the phone in the middle of wherever that tower was is where it's going to show it. But it could have been really anywhere within that circle, which when you're only looking at a few miles could mean a lot of different things. And so that wasn't very accurate. However, there was more, they were able to get better technology to then combine with the cell tower dump. And a former U.S. Marshal named Johnny Walker was actually kind of assisting the TBI in and out with this case. And he worked alongside Terry Dicus when they were kind of going through looking at all of these cell records. Okay. He said he spent about, I think he said 3 months it took him, Johnny Walker did when he testified, 3 months to develop the exact map and the exact location of Holly's phone from the abduction time at 7:45 a.m. until 9:25 a.m. when it went off the map entirely, right? When it not turned off, but when it was no longer pinging. Okay. And it took him 3 months to do that because he had to kind of drive, stop. He used a stopwatch and a timer and all of these things so that it would accurately line up. So the TBI or AT&T provided a map first. They took Holly's cell phone information and made a map of where it looks like the phone had gone. Then he made his own map and he gave a copy to the TBI where he took AT&T's and then he overlaid every other bit of information he had. And so they're looking at cells and blocks on this map. And I don't fully understand all of that science. It's a good thing because that's not my job. So, but when he did that, that's why they can go back through all of the witness statements and all of the interviews they go through and all of these alibis and really fully specifically determine how truthful someone is. And they can also then look at their phones as well. So When the state objected to Johnny Walker giving any information regarding that cellular location. So this is where Terry Dicus says that the TBI called him in because he had an expertise in cell phone tracking. He was used as an expert witness. He had been on Joint Terrorism Task Force. He had been mainly in a lot of like tracking down fugitives. They had I think it was maybe when he was with the FBI, I'm not certain, but they had their own special unit of just cell phone, like investigator, cell phone expert people that can do exactly what he did, right? So he was a great witness to have, but evidently since it was objected to and sustained, the TBI wanted the jury to see this map that he made because it really kind of corroborates what all they were trying to say. But the jury never got to see this map or hear anything about it because it was rejected as an exhibit, unfortunately. So we do talk about that in cases where sometimes some of this information might make things go a different way if it had been able to be submitted. So ultimately saying, when you look at what Jason Autry said, in terms of where he was, if you look at his testimony when he is working off charges, I mean, I'll make no bones about that because that's what this is. When he was working off charges and he comes back to say these things after all this time, then he says, you look at that, but you match it with his cell phone records, then he would either be what he said at Shane Austin's house or what his phone shows 13 and a half miles away at work where his boss says he was at the same exact time, which would have been 9:42 a.m. And that's not possible. He was not at Shane Austin's house. So that version of stories is not true. It simply was not true. All right. So you guys, let me give you a few facts on Terry Britt before we wrap up, because that is what I think you're going to want to hear. So that's the case of those four guys who really kind of were nowhere. They all of a sudden got involved, with investigators in this, and then charged and dismissed and charged and dismissed. Zach Adams is currently still in prison for the abduction, rape, and murder of Holly Bobo. Like I said, Dylan, I believe, had the Alfred plea. Shane Austin committed suicide, and Jason Autry had been in and out with weapons charges and different things like that, but unrelated to Holly Bobo at this point. So if you look at some stalking incidents in Decatur County, there where Holly lived, I'm going to read to you what Terry Dicus wrote when he was able to get this information kind of all wrapped up and put in one place. So there were a total of 9 stalking incidents, he says, reported to law enforcement in the past several years prior to Holly's disappearance. There was a couple that are going to be unrelated that dealt with a couple married people and this kind of thing, maybe a burglar. But there are some these other 7 incidences of stalking are a little bit different. So pretty much all except for one of them involve a victim of stalking that was blonde-haired. So it looks like he searched the Tennessee incident-based reporting data system, and he used all of this like classification, like incident classification. Okay. So once they get there, you know that the kidnapper knew exactly where to park the vehicle, where to approach the home, where to go when he kidnapped her. He had to have done homework. Like I said before, even per the BAU's account of this suspect, this was planned. This was like Holly had likely been watched. Okay. Someone knew when she was supposed to leave that morning. So, excuse me. There was one incident that involved a white van that kept driving by a house. The people noticed the same van driving slowly by on the next evening. The dad chases down a guy basically and threatens to kill him. Okay. The second incident involved a lady who was accosted while getting her mail. So she goes out to get her mail. This guy comes up to her. She said that she was so shaken up by this incident that she had her dad live with her for a few weeks after the fact just to make sure this guy never approached her again. He scared her to death, this guy, but he also told her his actual government name. The third incident is someone who stated that she saw a red minivan watching her. This vehicle would go by her house several times a day. This victim knew that this guy was trying to establish her routine. Like she felt like he was trying to figure out what her day looked like. He kept watching. He was waiting. But her husband was a deputy sheriff and set this guy off on the right path, right? So he kind of confronts the guy. The guy goes away. Oh, no, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm so sorry to have disturbed you. The fourth incident is someone who complains about what they called a kidnapper van following her home from work 3 different times. She lived in this specific area, which was actually the closest residence to where Holly's lunchbox was discarded.
Mm-hmm.
This victim stated that she observed the suspect getting increasingly brave, so she was able to call her boyfriend, who rushed to protect her and potentially thwarted an abduction. She described the vehicle as a white van, a kidnapper van. The 5th incident of stalking that took place, we're talking about all these incidences that took place prior to Holly's abduction in that one county, Decatur County. The 5th incident happened in April of 2011, which is actually the same week that Holly was kidnapped. And this victim saw a white van driving northbound on Highway 641. When she turned to go home, it whipped around and caught up with her. She saw the vehicle again on a different night on the other side of the county. She knew who this guy was. He tried to get her to go with him as she left for work one day, and she noticed the same van following her on multiple occasions. There's a 6th victim. There's a 7th victim. These are all victims of stalking, and they're all describing either one of 2 vans. Mm-hmm. Then we've got 2 days later, we got another stalker following this victim home in a frightening encounter. It says that he stopped in the road and stared at her. He said, "Hey, I know it was you, and you are next." This is after she had actually went to investigate, went to police about this.
Okay.
He said, "I know it was you, and you are next." So, excuse me. This goes on and on. So there's a lot of them. Every single one of the victims describing this person either having a license plate information, the van color and make and model information, or knowing this man's name. Every one of them involved Terry Britt as the stalker. Every single one of them. So another thing to know is that the day that Holly was abducted, her car, like I told you, was in the carport. Mom had gone to work. Dad had gone to work. Clint has a vehicle, but Clint's vehicle, I believe, had been detailed, if I'm not mistaken. Excuse me. So Clint's vehicle was not parked where it was normally parked in the driveway. So if you're watching for Holly and looking at her daily routine, you know what vehicles to look for. Mom leaves at the same time every day to go to school. Dad leaves at the same time to go to work. And Clint has his routine. Clint's car was not visible to the road that day because he had, again, I think he had it detailed. Either way, it was parked in a detached other garage. So you couldn't see it. So it looked like Holly was home alone that day. It looked like her car was the only one there. So I told you that the stalker in every one of those 7 instances was Terry Britt. He's the only person in that county who's been reported to have stalked anyone over the past 5 years. He also perfectly matches the description that Clint provided of Holly's abductor. If I haven't yet, let me show you a picture of Terry Britt. Do you remember I told you that Clint's description of the individual was, I wish I had more. Again, I'm going to put them on Instagram. I have one picture of him here, but that this man had black feathery hair over his collar, over his ears, that he was between 5'10", 6 feet, and about 200 pounds, and had a deep, raspy voice. Let me tell you that Terry Britt is between 5'10" and 6 feet. He is right at around 200 pounds. He has smoked almost all of his 50-something years, and he has a very deep, raspy voice, okay? This is Terry Britt. Now, if you wonder about his hair being long enough to cover his collar, like Clint said, until this photo, until Holly's abduction, dating back to his first mugshot in 1977, Terry Britt always had long hair. He had long swept back hair that at least reached his shoulders most of the time. His wife's boss at the paper company says that right around the time of Holly's abduction is the first and only time he'd ever seen Terry Britt with short hair. He had just cut his hair. Okay. So it's very good to know that. That's Terry Britt. All right. So let me tell you what else we've got here. So this is what, remember if I told you that Terry said that he and his wife were out getting a bathtub that day. They were just preoccupied all day long. She took the day off work because they were together all day long. Okay. So he says that when he's first interviewed, he says that that he was with his wife all day, and that his ex-wife called him to tell him that Holly Bobo had been abducted. I think that's a very interesting detail.
Uh-huh.
All right, let's see here. So, the TBI crime lab, all right, processed evidence for DNA. So that's the stuff you're going to find in saliva, blood, right? All of the stuff that we talk about all the time. And that can sometimes tell about people having the same DNA strand, like kind of narrow it down in terms of like pools of population of people. The TBI does not process mitochondrial DNA. This again is from Terry Dykes' book when he's discussing this. That's what you're going to find in bone, in hair, your keratin, your anything osseous, right? So the FBI does, however, have that technology. So they were able to call in the FBI to help out with processing this mitochondrial DNA. And they do that. And once they find the analysis of it, when they get on the phone with the FBI, they say they finished the analysis of all of the hair submitted on the Bobo case. And the hair recovered from 2 of Terry Britt's vans is microscopically and macroscopically identical to the known sample of head hair belonging to Holly Bobo. Yo.
Did you say 2 vans?
2 vans. So remember in those stalking incidences, they talk about a maroon van and they talk about a white kidnapper van. He drove the white van more often, but his wife, Janet, owned a maroon caravan. So the hair that they retrieved from those 2 vans was actually found intertwined with rope in those vehicles. So when the FBI processes the mitochondrial DNA. So remember, I have to kind of stress this point. Terry Dykes was removed from this investigation because they felt like he had tunnel vision on Terry Britt. We talk about tunnel vision and how dangerous that can be. I've not yet found what I feel like is tunnel vision in this case because it looks like he keeps finding things that are adding up to the investigation. Brian says all the time, you go where the leads take you. You follow the lead. You can't make it have hair in his van. You can't make him fit the description of the, you know what I mean? It's like these things are just happening. This is what is following, and kind of developing into him looking like much more of a concrete suspect than those 4 dummies who were just cooking meth and doing, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I mean,
and he has the history. So let me tell you this, but by the time of Holly's abduction, Terry Britt had served upwards of 25 years in prison throughout his life. So about half of his lifetime in prison for rape. Rape and other sexual assaults of women. So almost all of his victims have blonde hair and blue eyes. And most of them don't exceed their 20s. So they're all around Holly's age, around Holly's appearance. And he does have history as a sexual deviant. Those other 4 do not. And I know that past crimes don't implicate you in future, things, but it's very important to see what kind of person we're dealing with here. So let me tell you another thing. So they get Terry Britt on the stand, okay? And they're asking him, like, okay, where were you that day? He continues to just hammer down that he was with his wife all day long, no matter what. He was with her all day long. They can't seem to, change that from him, even though we're going to find out why that doesn't seem to be the case. And when they do, they say, he denies, he kind of chuckles. He's like, nah, I didn't do it. Nah, I mean, he's charged with something pretty heinous, but he just says, nah, I didn't do it. And when they ask him if he knows Holly Bobo, he continues to say, no. And then he'll end with, not that I know of, every time. Not that I know of. So when they talk about, they finally ask him, like, what's going to happen? Like, if someone like you, if someone kidnapped Holly that might be like you, like, what can you imagine would be going through their mind? Okay, this is another excerpt from Terry's book. And the reason I'm pulling these, Terry Dykes' book, is because when you look up information on the Bobo case, this stuff is public knowledge. Like, these are things that were, disclosed in court and whatnot. But it's very difficult to find a lot of these details because Zach Adams was convicted in her murder. And so like really you're finding a lot more details about those guys. Okay. So that's where this book has stuff in it that's a little bit more difficult to find. I read it over, the past however long. And it's, if you're interested in the case, I do recommend it. It's a quick enough read, and it's very, very informative as to kind of how this stuff goes on. And maybe you can make a bit more of an opinion yourself on it. But so when they asked Terry Britt on the stand what someone like him would have done or thought of, the thought processes, if he were to have kidnapped Holly, he says, he had already said, by the way, before that she had a perfect body and that she was young and pretty. He says, Terry Britt says, yeah, like a toy, some people might think. She has a perfect, somewhat body. So this is pretty gross what I'm about to read you, but this is just him hypothesizing, right, what someone else would think. So he says, see, this man, when he goes and gets this female, he's like, okay, if he's doing it for himself. Now, if he's doing it for somebody else for money to get her from point A to point B, like I was talking to you before, that's different. But if he's doing it for himself, for his own benefit, then he's going to go snatch her up and he can't wait to get her where he's going to take her because he's wanting that body. He says, all right, he's going to make mistakes along the way. I mean, he's got to make some mistakes. He says, okay, he's got her. He can do whatever he wants to do with her, whatever. But when he gets done, that's when reality sets in. See, right now it's just a fantasy world. But here comes reality. Now I've got a body. What am I going to do with it? Because if you keep it, you got to feed it. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
What changed?
He started referring to her as it.
Right. Mm-hmm. He was talking about her hypothetically while he's talking about the chase, while he's talking about abducting her, while he's talking about raping her. Mm-hmm. And then he talks about, well, what happens if you kill her? And then immediately the pronoun changes to it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So he says, because if you keep it, you got to feed it. And he says, you got to hide it. It ain't going to happen. And if you kill it, what are you going to do with it? There's just no way. So that was his, oh, well, if I had done it, that's what I would do. That's how people like this think story. Okay. So it's disgusting, obviously. Let me tell you.
That's after he's already served 20-something years off and on throughout his life for committing these same crimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. For doing exactly this. Also, well, we don't have him murdering anybody that we know of, right? But we have all of the sexual deviancy. We have all of these rapes, like multiple rapes. Mm-hmm. He keeps getting released, though. Somehow he's able to continue to rape women because he's being released, okay? And then on top of that, we have all the stalking. Mm-hmm. And that's huge. That's not someone who is doing one of these, he snaps and rapes somebody. That does happen. People kind of seem to not be able to help themselves, and these things happen.
Yeah.
I don't mean that as giving them graces, but you know what I mean? No. Not a planned event. Mm-hmm. Remember we talked about Holly's case. Someone had to have kind of known when she was going to be leaving that morning. Mm-hmm. It was someone that was unknown to her. She didn't scream that person's name. Mm-hmm. She didn't say, get away, whoever. Yeah. Someone she didn't know, but someone who knew her routine. And that's what his MO was. He's been doing this. And that's the reported incidences, like 7 reported to police instances of stalking. Okay. Actually there were a couple of more that happened since Holly's abduction that people came forward and was like, I don't know if this is important. Right. And then they described his van, his plate numbers. Okay. So there was another teacher that he stalked. Let's see here. Bank clerk. These are other ones. These are other people that, let's see here. So we know that he was so the first rape that we know of, he was 19 years old and he raped a 14-year-old girl. He says to this girl, would you like to ride with me? Or she says, would you like to ride with me sometime? I know there's some very good trails. They're talking about horseback riding. Mm-hmm. And this is when he was 19 and she was 14. And so they hop in together, and when she gets back to her car and tells her friend that really terrible things happened out in the woods with him. He had raped and sodomized her. He threatened her. And so that was actually, I'm sorry, she was the second known victim of his. But I mean, this started on early on. And then we find out he actually uses, so I told you about his wife, Janet. So he met Janet. I think I have that pulled up here as well. He met her because he was actually, let's see here. Here it is. So Janet knew that Terry Britt spent 21 years in prison for 4 different rapes. She actually started writing him letters while he was in prison for rape. And then when he came back out that last time, that's when they get together, they get married. But then you find out that he has 7 ex-wives. So remember the guy that's kind of the loner in the sense of he can't keep a relationship. He creeps people out, right? So what he would also do, though, is he started using the women, like whatever woman he was with, like his relationship woman, we'll say, as kind of his wingman. Mm-hmm. So there's an incident from one time at a bar where he tells his wife at the time, like he set his sights on this waitress, a younger female who had like lost her mom prior to that. Her mom had passed away. They kind of used that to start talking to her. So his wife at the time kind of pulls her in, like, aren't you so-and-so's daughter? Oh, we loved her so much, right? Just all of this kind of grooming pattern, but in a short amount of time, not the grooming we look at over years. And they basically talk her, like into, you realize then that he's using these women to get the girls, the young women. Right. Mm-hmm. And so there was an incident actually where another lady, he was supposed to be taking her kind of like from point A to point B in his vehicle. And her account is that on the way, he starts assaulting her sexually. Like as he's driving, he starts to touch her and do these things to her. And she's terrified. She's able to open the door of the van and jump out. And she runs basically right into a police officer who is there like in the road. And tells her story. They charge him with this, or they get him. Yeah, they charge him with this. And then that's when you find out that his wife was with him at that time. Janet, the one that is currently his lady, was with him at that time in the vehicle. That kind of corroborates the idea that he has them with her. And his wife said at the time that he can't ejaculate just being able to like grab these girls, that he needs her with him. So it kind of goes from bad to worse. But this is the guy that they said that Terry Britt had Terry Dicus had tunnel vision on, and they didn't want to pursue him any longer as a suspect in this case. So let's talk about his alibi quickly. He had a handwritten receipt for a bathtub purchase. The place that he says he purchased the bathtub from does carbon copy receipts. Okay, do you remember those? It's like the 2-layer, like usually it's yellow or white on top with that carbon copy on the bottom. So they have one and you have one. They did not have a record of him buying a bathtub at the time that he said he did. He had that handwritten bathtub receipt in a safe locked in his home. So then when investigators came, and they did come to his house, remember they retrieved hair that was tested that had been found in ropes in his vans. And so when they are searching his home and taking all of his stuff and getting into forensics and analysis of all of that, they find this receipt. So he says he's gone to the one place, then to the second place, back to the first place to get the bathtub. Well, his cell phone pings, the receipts, all of this, the only receipt he has from that day, it was much, much later in the day, and it was to buy vinyl flooring. It wasn't to buy a bathtub. He did purchase a bathtub at some point, but it was not that day. But that's his alibi that he's leaning on still, was the bathtub. Okay. So let's see here. They did not sell a bathtub, like I told you, to Terry Britt on April 13th, 2011, or any other day that week. And he was in Camden that day, like he said he was, but not until after 2 p.m. Remember, Holly was abducted and her phone quit pinging at not by 9:28 that morning. And so the only purchase was that of the vinyl flooring. And so we have him also controlling with his wife in the sense that he would call the newspaper that she worked for. And sometimes her boss would say he'd catch her have like an open line, meaning that she's answered the phone and just leaving it on, like leaving it there with open air while she continues to work. And Terry was doing this so he could make sure that she was in fact still at work and wasn't talking to other people. Okay. So he's manipulative and controlling with his, relationship women as well. So when they retrieve his like internet searches and things like that, Jerry Burns, we have to reference him once a week, I feel like, but he kind of had these similar type search histories. But his search histories were rape, torture, actually it was kidnapping, rape, torture, porn. That's the stuff that Terry Britt was looking at. And so a lot of them were very early in the morning in the sense of like his wife leaves to go to work and then he's popping these on. So just all of this is definitely pointing in the direction of someone who could do these types of things. Let me see here. So dogs. So they get cadaver dogs out to Terry Britt's house early on in the investigation. So evidently they went berserk per Terry Dicus. So evidently 2 of the vans indicated an odor of human decomposition. So they talk about, and Brian and I've talked about this a lot, the way these dogs work. It's a science and it's an art. So your handler, your dog, sometimes it's only as good as all of these things combined. Okay. So if a human being is decomposing for 2 minutes, it can start to develop the scent that the dogs can hit on. And evidently the dogs hit on 2 of his vans, and they also hit on a shovel, a pickaxe, and 2 other tools that were found on Terry Britt's property. I'm just kind of going through the bullet points of the things of why it sounds wild that we haven't followed up more on, or the rest of the investigative agencies didn't follow up more on Terry Britt. So remember how Terry and his wife were together all day, and she stands by that. Oh goodness, she gets angry actually. So when his cell records were subpoenaed, again, this is coming from the book, along with geolocation information, they found out that in fact Terry and his wife were not together, surprise, surprise, the day that Holly was kidnapped, because they were speaking together on their cell phones at 2 different locations. So they pinged off of 2 different towers, 2 different locations, and they made phone calls to one another. So I told you that her boss says that Terry Britt changed his appearance by cutting his hair short for the first time in his life right around the time of Holly's abduction. He did not buy a bathtub that day. So he talks about going to, like, that he and his wife showed up at the paper place around noon that day. And what he's trying to say is that we were together all day. We left the house together. We went to her place of work to tell them that she wouldn't be in. But he slips, and we talk about slips, or Brian will say blurts, or things that people do when you're like, oh, I'm sorry, say what? Kind of like when he changed her to it earlier when he was recounting like what he would do. And he says that he'll say, so I pulled in. He's talking about to the paper place. Then he changes and says, we got there. And then he'll say, I told her that, what does he say? Oh, she was telling her boss she wasn't going to be there for the rest of the day. But that's like a weird thing to do, right? Because if y'all are just at home, she can just call her boss and say she's not coming in. Why would she say I'm not going to be there the rest of the day if she wasn't actually just leaving early, right? And then I think the biggest thing, obviously, is that the biggest thing is just that their cell phone records show that they were talking. He said he didn't even have a cell phone, but then when pressed, you realize he says that his wife has 2 cell phones, so he's not counting one of them as his because she pays for them. And he says, he specifically does say, but they're no contract, meaning that wasn't under his name. Because you know what they were? They were like the prepaid ones to where nobody can tell you who they belong to, but in all accounts, they did. And so he actually... The idea is that he called her and made her leave work early so that they could have the alibi. And he says that one of his ex-wives called him at 12:17 p.m. and told him Holly's abduction was all over the news. I think it's so weird every time I read about that or hear about that, because why in heaven's name is your ex-wife calling you to tell you that Holly has been abducted? Yeah. So he left his house and he's on surveillance video, and he goes past where Holly's cell phone was discarded and later found. Let me see. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything here. He cut his hair. We talked about that. You got anything on with him?
No, there was a comment earlier about where was she located, and basically was that, kind of corroborating their statement.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
So no. So that's, I'm glad you said that. There are so many twists and turns on this one, and particularly because there's 4 guys with their 4 similar names, all charged with kind of 4 similar charges in this, denying any accountability for it, and then all these weird circumstances, and then them all saying that they did do it, but then they all have about 3 different stories to that, and none of them line up. Okay. Ultimately, like I said earlier, their cell phone records show and their alibis show that they couldn't have been the ones that were there physically that day to either abduct or to kill her or to dispose of her or her belongings. They're literally don't line up. Okay. But on top of that, where her body was found was different than what any of them said. Dylan said a couple of different things. And one of which was that they were going to toss her body into the water under the overpass of Interstate 40. Her body was not found in the water. Another one was that Jason Autry said that when he was with Zach Adams and they were going to dispose of her, he saw her foot move, said, "Oh, she's still alive." Zach shot her in the back of the head. At that point, they were under an overpass, but then they drove off with her body. And that Zach dropped him off at home, so he doesn't know what happened after that. And then another one was that when they relied so heavily on the fact that Zach Adams told people, like, if you don't shut up, I'll do the same to you as what happened to Holly Bobo. Like, I don't know how that's not considered just as circumstantial as any other hearsay there is. Mm-hmm. But he talks about throwing you in a hole just like Holly Bobo, or just like I did with Holly Bobo. Holly wasn't in a hole. She wasn't in a grave. Her body was not found under debris in that kind of way or under the ground. So no, and there were more. They had multiple false stories of admittance or as confession, and none of them actually, other than the only thing that lined up a little bit was when Jason Autry said that Zach Adams shot her in the back of the head. Mm-hmm. But you've got to understand that by the time he said that again, he'd had 2 years to look into the state's discovery. And by that time, when they were first arrested, they didn't have her body. But by then, her remains had been found. And there was the bullet hole in her skull that was pretty much common knowledge. And he was then promised with the dangling carrot of time served, federal charges gone. He'd be getting out. You better have a story. And he did. And so then... so I hope that clears any of that up. And if you still got the comments up, if any more questions come up, I'm happy to. Yeah,
that comment was from Heather Vick, who says, long-time listener, but this was the first time in the chats.
Oh, you know what? She's right. We chat back and forth sometimes on Instagram messages, but she's right. I don't think I've seen her in the chats on YouTube before. Welcome, Heather, if you're still up this late. This is night shift, and this is Andrea up very late tonight. So let's see here real quick. I just don't want to leave out anything about Terry Britt because it's it blows my mind. Oh, okay. Let's do this. So they tell, I told you about the dogs going wild. I think we've talked about everything else. Okay, yes. So let me tell you this. Remember we talked about Clint, the brother, talking about that deep, raspy, gravelly voice, right? So Terry Dicus took, I believe, 7 people, including Terry Britt. So he has Terry Britt and then 6 other people who were all cops, who all had alibis working this certain day, or on Holly's disappearance day, right? Mm-hmm. And they all have a range of voices. And he has these other 6 men read the Miranda rights, right? Because there's an interview where they have Terry Britt read back when he's being Mirandized. So he's reading back, like, basically, right? Like, I concur, I agree to this, I submit to this, I understand it, whatever. So he reads it just because he's in an interview with investigators. And then Terry Dicus has these other 6 investigators read it to get a range of voices. He then presents this to Clint, her brother. Mm-hmm. He's put Terry Britt at number 5. He's voice number 5 out of the 7. he has them repeat them twice. And he makes Clint listen to this whole thing twice. And he says, I don't want you to say a thing or make a conclusion until you've heard them all twice. Mm-hmm. He says he's watching Clint, and as Clint listens to number 1, he listens to number 2. When he gets to number 5, which is Terry Britt's voice, he says his face perks up, his head shot up, and then he held the finger, kind of like, keep listening. He listens to them all again, and then Clint said, it's number 5. Number 5 is the voice I heard in the garage that morning.
We haven't talked about this. Mm-mm. That's like I've never heard of someone doing that. That's like the equivalent of a lineup. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People can sometimes do it with vehicles or whatever. I've never heard it done.
If I remember correctly, Terry Dicus couldn't get the okay for a physical lineup.
Yeah.
If I remember. That's what he wanted to do that as well.
Yeah.
But if you do line up Terry Britt with Clint's cousin, whom he said had the same body structure, almost identical to whoever abducted his sister, they are same.
Yeah. Lineups, like some people put a lot of faith into them, which is good, but the lineup is only good a facial, or the face lineup, like a mug shot or arrest photos or DMV photos or whatever.
Well, and I would argue, I guess we've not looked into the law behind this, but that. I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you there.
No, go ahead, babe.
I won't let it happen again. I do it all the time. That I don't know how that would be. How's that any different? I mean, they're both senses, your eyes and your ears. Like you'd want me to listen to a voice comparison.
Yeah,
I never have my contacts in. Don't take my eyewitness account. But I'm just saying, like they're both senses. Like I'm not sure how one could weigh heavier, though.
Because lineups have been, lineups have been challenged over and over and over. Duke Lacrosse case.
Yeah, true.
So, but when you do the lineup, things that get suppressed are things like, your suspect was described wearing a white shirt. Mm-hmm. And one of the people in your lineup had a white shirt who just happened to be who.
Would you not put them all in a white shirt in that scenario?
Normally you do stuff like that, but sometimes lineups have been suppressed because something like that gets overlooked. Because you have to pick these sometimes out of random photos, or some people have programs that can pull them depending on your department. But I've never heard
AI now.
Yeah, I don't know. But that's kind of wild about the voice. Mm-hmm. I hadn't heard of that. But that is a good way. But
isn't that interesting though? Because Clint hit on that and he was like, "Oh, yeah, that's the guy." Actually, when he first said it, he said, I think it's number 5. And he was like, it could be number 5 and he named someone like number 2, whatever. Right? He's like, I think it's number 5. Well, I think he asked to hear both of those again.
Yeah.
And, Terry Dicus inserts a bit of humor into his book, but he's kind of like, I felt pretty good about it because it was either Terry Britt or it was this married father of whatever who was on shift working at whatever police station the day that Holly was abducted, And then Clint, because I think we all do this, right? We all second guess ourselves. So at first he was like, that's it. Like literally his words were, that's the voice I heard in the garage. That was his initial gut reaction. And as time went on, he kept saying like, I'm 80% sure. Like I'm pretty sure it probably was stuff that,
Yeah.
But here's the deal. So they wiretapped Terry Britt's like home and phone and stuff, right? And this is wild to me. So you've got Dylan Adams, who has like some intellectual disabilities there, some, kind of like lower on the IQ side, whatever, lives under the bond conditions with a retired police officer for over a month, and then comes back with this big story that implicates his brother. He actually comes back with like 4 stories, right? They're all different. And actually none of them add up to where any of them could be at the times he says. But that was enough for then they were able to press charges against Zach and ultimately convict him literally on that. There was no evidence that tied them to Holly, other than Zach ran his mouth like a dummy saying, I'll do to you what I did to Holly. But these guys were literally injecting methamphetamine mixed with morphine pills into, like, we're talking whatever, right? But that's it. He never admitted to them. He never confessed to killing this girl until he did. His lawyer has come back to say, well, I thought he was going to be prosecuted. And so now, we're going to get into what's happening now, but we learn now that his lawyer had said to him, like, if they take you to trial, you're, like I said earlier, you're going to be prosecuted. So you best meet them where they're at to get a lesser sentence. Or like if you want death off the table, you better come up with something. Yeah. So what happens when you do that? People come up with something. Like if that's an option, they're going to avoid the worst case scenario, even sometimes if it means pleading guilty to something you didn't do. Yeah. So I told you about that. I do want you to know, so that I want to make sure that I didn't miss one thing about Terry Brett, because this blows my mind. And I think that that's all on him. Now, there has just this past May, like of 2025, like just a couple of months ago, hearings have been started, a post-conviction hearing for Zach Adams, because they are now citing ineffective counsel. Jason Autry has come back to say he lied. He was like, that never happened. I didn't see Zach Killer. I wasn't at Shane Austin's house, which initially is what he had said. Initially, what he said, his boss corroborated his alibi. His cell phone records corroborated exactly when and where he was that day, what he had said happened. And when they asked him why, in heaven's name, did you make this story up? Like, why did you say that? And he told them, well, he told me that my federal charges would go away. I would be considered time served on Holly. And like, that's that, like, it would be a better deal if I went on and said that. And they said, well, how did you come up with this story? He said, oh, I just kind of went about how my day kind of went, but then I just added Holly into it. So he did go to Shane's that day at some point, probably whenever his phone shows him going there, right, to do drugs. Like, what they all said initially is exactly what had happened. But when Jason Autry came back and said that, like, hey, like, so BT Dubs, none of that was true, that kind of got this ball in motion. Yeah. And so now, as we speak, Zach Adams is in the process of post-conviction hearings to try to get this stuff overturned. We don't have word on whether or not Terry Britt will be charged or anything like that. Okay. I will tell you, I told you I read Terry Dykas's book. We actually reached out to him. He has since gone on, while he was going through the academy for the TBI, he was simultaneously obtaining his degree in law. So he became a lawyer right around the time he finished the course for the TBI. And once he was removed from Holly's case around 2013, and he'll say he's in good graces. He says that they worked very hard. There's no hard feelings there. Like with him and other individuals of the TBI. They obviously just had differing opinions as which way to go with this investigation. But he now operates a law firm in Savannah, Tennessee. It's out in West Tennessee, and that's originally where he was from. So he's got a small law firm right there. We called his office, got a call back from him, and chit-chatted for a little bit. I can tell you he was super humble, super kind and gracious. He was thankful that, Holly's case is being talked about. I told him that we'd be referencing his book. I wouldn't want to ever take someone else's material without, them knowing about it like that. And he was happy about that. But when I asked him about coming on the show or wanting to speak to it, he said, you know what, thank you so much for the offer. And he said, when we were on the phone, he said, I talked to a buddy of mine at the TBI over lunch yesterday. And he said, and I just told him I can't do it. And he said, that case, he got very close to the family. He got very, very intertwined with Terry Britt and with investigating this and with the way it all went down and with those other 4 guys being charged and Terry being kind of ignored with all of this. And now we're doing these post-conviction hearings. So it's all really stirring everything back up. And he's just, again, very kind of gracious, but was like, just not interested in, really kind of opening that box and going back through it again. And I feel like that's fully understandable. Something I don't want you I would be remiss to forget about. Do you remember the loggers that I told you about early on in the show that were a few miles down the road just prior to 9 a.m. on the morning of Holly's disappearance? They didn't know anything about Holly or what was going on right then. Mm-hmm. And the 2 brothers, right? And they were out on that road, Holiday, I believe, Joe Holiday Road. And they saw this small black pickup driving by that had the decals and make and model sprayed over. Mm-hmm. So it was very unique in that way. With the man in his 50s with feathery black hair. Do you remember our suspect's description? Mm-hmm. A female that was blonde in a pink t-shirt. I think I forgot to tell you that when Holly was abducted, she was wearing a pink t-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
And that she was bent over. So I don't know if she was slumped, if she was bent, if she was incapacitated. We don't know anything like that, assuming that was Holly, that this guy drove so slowly by that they were able to see it. And the two things they said that stuck out at them, and he was wearing this guy was wearing a plain black baseball cap. You remember Clint said that the suspect had on a baseball cap with hair. They said feathery hair. He said hair out over his ears and collar. Okay. They said the main thing that stuck out were the two things that the truck was painted over like that, like any writing on the truck was painted over because it just looks odd, right? And that just kind of, even with them driving by, like it just didn't fit. They said like the appearance of this female with this man, like he was kind of a mess and he was older and this truck, and she seemed just put together. And I think they called her beautiful, but like what they could see, like it just didn't seem to fit. And we have senses like that for a reason. And so these things stood out of them, and that's what they found notable to tell investigators. Well, what you do need to know is that Terry Britt had, I believe they had 5 vehicles between he and his wife. They had the maroon caravan that was Janet's. Do you remember in the stalking incidences, he used that maroon van? They had the white van that was referred to around town as the kidnapper van that he drove more often. Both of those vans had the rope in them that was then later to have hair pulled, analyzed, and have mitochondrial or microscopic and macroscopic matches to Holly's hair. Okay. Separately, they had a small black, I believe, Dakota. Okay. Now, these loggers said that they thought the pickup was a Toyota, but they weren't really sure it was a small. Okay. Well, number one, they couldn't have known because the make and model was blacked out, right? It was painted over. So in saying that to you, Terry Britt did have a black Dakota that he actually painted the entire truck himself with a paint gun, black, and he painted over all of the decals and the make and model of the vehicle. Terry Britt also has been shown on surveillance video where he is wearing a plain black baseball cap. It has no writing on it, and it's plain, and it's him in surveillance alongside a vehicle of his with tags that are his. So there's no denying that is actually him, like getting gas or whatever he was doing in this video with that plain black hat on. Terry is, if I'm not mistaken, I think still in prison for one of the other assault charges. Nothing to do with Holly Bobo. I do feel obviously very, very heavily sorry for Holly's parents and family, in the sense that, they may have to go through all of this stuff again, but at the same time, if it means that the person who actually did this is the one that's going to be convicted in it, then that would be a good thing as well.
Question came up in the comments about why was Terry basically not able to arrest?
Okay. Yep, I'm seeing it.
Like, why was Terry not able to arrest Terry?
Okay, let me go back a little bit really quickly. So we have Lauren Jett, who I don't recognize her from the chats, but welcome, Lauren. That's really cool to always see like a new face in here. And she says, what does the family think of the conviction? So if you are new here, this show went a little bit longer than norm. But in saying that, usually we wait till the end like this to kind of go through and chat with you guys, and usually get a little bit sillier after the case, but kind of answer some questions. So she says, what does the family think of the conviction? I don't know what their current thoughts are when it comes to what's going on now. Like now that there's the post-conviction trial and it's kind of getting stirred up, and, I also don't know how much evidence they knew about Terry Britt at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I know that when this originally happened, I think that they felt solid in Zach Adams' conviction. You have to understand, again, it's one of those where her family isn't behavioral analysis, people. They don't work for the FBI. They don't work for the TBI. They're not seeing the ins and outs of all of these other things. Now, they were very, very helpful and involved in the investigation. Don't get me wrong there. But again, when I say a small town, like Holly's mother taught Shane Austin when he was a kid. She's an elementary school teacher. She's the one who got his booking photo from the jail, or however she obtained the photo, to then come back and say, hey, I think he was the one staring at. So like, I can't imagine what a family feels like in a situation like this, but I can only imagine it feels good to think that somebody is charged, rightfully so, in this death. At the time, I think that they felt solid about it and felt like the right guy was being charged, because he's also running around saying he did it at the time, like to friends. I think that that's probably something that obviously is very difficult to hear, but I'm sure they would think, why wouldn't you believe him if he's saying it, right? Yeah. So I think that that was their initial thought process. But again, that was when this, around, I think their trials then were around like 2017. So current day, though, I don't know what they think. And I really don't know, though, how much they know about Terry Britt's history, like very specifically, kind of like we laid out. I don't know if they know that much about him, and I do venture to say that might change. That might change some thoughts, right? And then Heather said that this is what Brian was saying a moment ago, how did Terry Dicus never get an arrest with all of this evidence? Because the TBI was called in to assist. He wouldn't have been like the charging agency in that sense. And so if the local department didn't find it, am I right here? Am I speaking correctly here? If they didn't find it worthy of follow-up or of charges or what, then he can't solely on his own, right? Like charge him or proceed with that. And the problem happened. Oh, this is what thank you for saying that, Heather, because that reminds me of what I was going to say a moment ago. And I kind of got sidetracked. When they wiretapped Terry Britt's house, like his phone and stuff. So Terry Dicus was able to at least obtain that. So they do this. And I forget how long they had him bugged for, but like they didn't get any information from that. So they didn't get anything from his phones saying that, him, what calling a neighbor to admit to Holly's abduction. Like, I'm not sure what. I
don't mean to laugh, but like that was weird.
Like, it's fine to do it and maybe you find something, but if you don't, that doesn't exclude him either. Right. Like, So Terry Dicus will say that around that time, I think the other investigators were leaning pretty heavily on the Adams brothers and Shane and Jason Autry. And when no like evidence or admission or anything like that came back with the wiretap, that's kind of when the waters started parting for him going in the direction of Terry Britt and them going the other direction. He said kind of one by one, that's when a lot of other TBI members were just like, this guy, I don't know. He doesn't have it. He didn't say anything. And I think it's really bizarre. Him not saying anything on the phone, I think doesn't.
And I didn't. And I wasn't trying to be disrespectful by laughing about the. Go and get some of that. Man.
That's fine.
About the wiretap, it's just like if he's pretty much a lone operator or lone suspect, or the person he works with could potentially be his wife. If that's what they're worried about, like, oh, maybe he'll talk to his wife about it. I
think that would have been probably the idea.
Right.
But just because
But they're just going to talk about it in the house. Like, they're not going to necessarily get on the phone.
Well, he says later. He lies about things that we know were lied about, right? So it's not just me saying, he lies about everything. I mean, things that are corroborated, he lies about. But he also says later two things. When he's asked, I think under oath, did you know that you were tapped? And he was like, no, I had no idea. Well, Terry Dicus is like, you're required to tell them when you complete a wiretap. And he said, he was told by me, to the point that so what happens though, is that he started believing, he also then says, I'm sorry, my like squirrel brain's kicking in. So he'll say like, he didn't know. But then we have witness accounts where he's told people that he assumed since they were investigating him that he would be bugged. And he said something like, it sounds something like I'd be dumb to not think that they'd bug my house.
Yeah, right.
So there you go, right? Also, though, where was I going with that? His kind of relationship with Terry Dicus is a little funny because I think he thinks he caused what?
No, go ahead.
I think he thinks he caused, like that he called Terry Dicus's bluff, right? So when Terry Dicus first says, and he laid it out, he does it in a way that I think you all may have heard. I know I've heard Brian reference the way he would do in an interview, because you hear some of these people and like interviewers with potential suspects, and they slam their hand down on a table and they're like, I'm not going to tell you what I know. You tell me what you did, and why would I tell you what I know? And Brian's always like, tell them what you know. And lay out what you got.
Oh yeah,
give it to him, right? And Terry did. Terry Dicus did, and he said, look, I'll be straight with you. I've got this. You said you were here. Your cell phone tells me you were here. I think that you traveled north this way. You had her at this time. You waited around. You thought she was alone. You took her. You assaulted her. You had to crouch down with her and wait till she was able to stand up and walk with you to walk her out of the woods to get to your vehicle. He tells him everything. But then he tells him not only his hypothesis of how it went down, he tells him that he's got timestamps for this. He's got his wife's boss on the phone for this. We know when she was at work. We know you guys weren't together all day. If she's your only alibi, kick it to the curb, because you two were on the phones talking to each other when you said you didn't have a cell phone from two different geographical locations. He tells him everything. And he just kind of sits and he stares and he does what a Jerry Burns would do. And he doesn't say a thing, right? But when he gets on the stand at trial and he does his whole thing, kind of reminiscent. Do you remember when OJ wrote the book about the book that basically says how he? Was there like how he murdered Nicole? But it's called like If I Were to Have Murdered Nicole, and it like goes through all the details of exactly what happened to the two of them. And you're like, what the hell is that? So Terry Dicus, when he does the thing on the stand where he's like, oh, I mean, if I had abducted, raped, and killed Holly Bobo, this is probably what somebody, if they were like me, would think when they're doing it. And he goes through all these details, right? It was so bizarre. He does that. And then someone gets on to like cross and asks him, do you know Terry Dicus? And he said something like, he does a lot of chuckling. He does a lot of kind of smirking and chuckling on the stand. And he says, yeah, don't we all know about Mr. Dicus, right? He does one of those. So when Terry tells him in an interview that he has a witness, like, oh, my witness will corroborate that you did this, you looked like this, you said these words, right? But then in the upcoming weeks and months after that, they didn't charge him with anything. Terry Dicus is pretty sure that Terry Britt like thought he was calling his bluff by saying, like, thinking like, oh, he doesn't even have a witness. Like, he's got nothing on me. So he got a little cocky. So his attitude gets a little different. So when he heard, this part's a little comical. Actually, I wish I'd remembered it when I was on the phone with Terry Dicus. There's a part where when he's being questioned, they say, do you understand that Terry Dicus was removed from the case, in 2013? And Terry Britt says, he kind of chuckles and he says, yeah, somebody got fired. And he said, I hope he has to go on food stamps now. And he kind of like laughs, like but I think he really thought he called Terry Dicus his bluff, which is another thing that's like super infuriating with all of this. But I don't know. And then when you look back and that he spray painted this truck, and then it's exactly what these witnesses said early on and about the girl in the pink shirt. It's just bizarre. They ultimately were able to retrieve like her book bag, some like anatomy and physiology papers, just all of her nurse stuff. She was supposed to be going to school that day. So the assumption is that she probably just had her backpack on that had lunchbox and everything. And one by one, he was discarding, which his cell phone pings do add up to exactly like where her body was found, the times, where things were dumped, all in line. Oh, he also has amnesia with the roads, by the way. So when they're asking him about all these back roads that he's lived at for decades, he even has, I say decades, I guess he spent half that time in prison, but between like him living there, he had a best friend who lived off of this other road that when they mention it, he's like, you keep throwing these road names at me. I don't know what that is. I don't know, So like the only roads he travels. So it blows my mind. I do hope at least that if they're able to overturn their convictions or, kind of get Zach Adams off on this, I do hope it's not one where, we've talked about it, like where they're like, well, we had our guy and whatever, and it fell through. I do hope that they pursue then, obviously, Terry Britt. I don't know. It's mind-boggling to me. And I don't pretend to know things I don't know in that sense. You know what I mean? So I can't sit back and say, why in the world didn't they do this thing? But when you can see almost like an aerial view, at the time they're not seeing it this way. But like when you can sit back now with all of this evidence and with all of these historical facts on the different people and kind of put it all together, and you got a more complete picture, I think.
Yeah, I do want to say, I don't know if we've talked about it or not, but like when you've got something like TBI assisting a local agency If that local agency, I have no clue who charged. I'm not trying to step on toes.
Mm-hmm.
But if a local agency doesn't have a lot of experience working homicides or studying false confessions or studying coercion or whatever, and then you've got a knucklehead confessing, then it's like sharks feeding. Everybody hears about it in the department. They all jump on board. And sometimes you'll have higher ups like lieutenants, captains, whatever, majors, whatever, getting briefed on stuff like that. And then putting pressure down and saying, well, you got a confession, you got a charge, And if you've got someone who's not as experienced or is just like, well, I mean, they confess, so here we go.
Right.
And then you quickly sort of become the hero of the day. Where if you're Terry Dicus and you're assisting with the investigation and you're part of, interviewing this suspect and looking at this pattern and his vehicles and all that, it's like a no-brainer. Hey, why is this guy not your number one suspect? But it sounds like Terry Dicus wasn't the actual lead. He was just TBI. But
he was TBI's case agent on her case. Yeah. So he was like their lead on this case, right. Kind of, if you will. It sounds like.
Yeah. So ultimately, when it comes down to it, the department in that jurisdiction is charging department. So whoever's lead for that, if it's a sheriff's department or an actual like town police department, that's where people can kind of butt heads. To me, looking at this on everything that you've told me about, that guy Terry Britt is your number one suspect, and it's very, very hard at this point to be like, why would we not? Why is this not
the focus? Yeah. I mean, his history is spot on for it. That's not something we do talk about that a lot. Like, there's a first time for everything. So it's not to say these guys couldn't turn around and do something bad like this, but they don't have a history of it.
Yeah.
And think about it. When Shane Austin committed suicide, I mean, this sounds terrible. They could have all three been like, he did it. I mean, honestly, if they all four were, somehow involved in this, that was their out right there easily. I mean, there's a lot of things they could say. But the thing is, too, you got to think outside of Dylan, after living with the cop for so long, changes his story that can't line up. It doesn't match. He does kind of implicate his brother, but he's kind of told to do that. So, and work off charges. So outside of that, it's not like they're walking around saying that the other one did it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Terry Dicus actually got on stand because once his, so the defense actually called him up. And he didn't like that. I mean, he did want to go say his piece there about Terry Britt for sure and ascertain that he doesn't think those guys did it, the other guys. But he didn't want to, you as an investigator are not often going to want to be on stand for the defense.
That's not cool.
That's not how that goes. But in this situation, obviously. And so, I think at one time, I can't remember if he calls them idiots or morons, on the stage or on the stand, because he says basically he's like, these morons couldn't balance a checkbook between the four of them. No, I don't think they did this. And I definitely don't think that they've held it together and kept a story or kept this secret, this long. But anyway, I don't know. I'm thirsty.
I'm so sorry.
No, I've talked a lot. This has been a very long show.
It has been.
I need to make a disclaimer at the beginning that just says, you might want to break this up into two parts yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, this is, I think, one that has to be
a lot of information.
Us going, at one time.
Yeah.
Not to make it a two-parter, but you're right. For listening pleasure.
Well, yeah. Well, you guys, I have enjoyed seeing y'all in the chats. We've missed you guys. I will say, I mean, I'd lie if I wasn't saying that it's been nice to take a little bit of time off and not be so on it this summer. So we'll kind of slowly start easing back into our weeklies. We might do 2 weeks, a week between the next one for a time or two, but then pretty soon we'll be right back into our weeklies.
I didn't sneeze. Tyler said not one sneeze.
Tyler, it's not over yet. How dare you?
It's been fun going to the beach, though.
Yes, we have been.
And enjoying ourselves.
This is true. We have been doing a lot of the beach. What?
No, I will say that, like, people listen, like, go have fun.
Yeah,
You
go
can.
have fun. Anytime you can.
But still tune back in,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yeah, and again, this was a listener recommended case, so I do love you guys reaching out. And Marine's Blood said that we can't leave until you sneeze.
I don't have one tonight. It's funny. I wonder why. Probably because I've been eating hot tamales.
That's his
That's the
kryptonite.
counter. Yeah.
Boxes and boxes and boxes of hot tamales. That's who should sponsor us.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it.
Hot tamales. Those are
True
candies,
crime,
by the
brought to
way.
you. I know
People like you
Oh,
know. I'm saying
God.
people sometimes I think we're talking about like a food or something, like not the little cinnamon candies that are so
Nobody
good.
thinks that.
I bet they do.
You think?
Do a survey.
Okay. Anyway, he's talking about the chewy candy, and they're very good. So, True Crime brought to you by Hot Tamales. All right, guys. Hey, we love y'all. Thanks again for tuning in, and gosh, for sticking with us. This has been a long show, and it's very late. But I will put all of those photos up on the Andrea Upload Instagram. Again, please, if you haven't hit subscribe or those kinds of things, do it, and that way you can be notified, especially right now since we're a little bit more sporadic, notified of whatever we have coming up. You can follow Brian at Brian Sanders Disruptors on Instagram. You can also follow him at the Disruptors. Disruptors with Brian Sanders on YouTube. Formulate any different combination of those words, and you can find him wherever he exists in the internet. And you can go pop over and listen to his show where he interviews just a multitude of guests, and usually drops those every Wednesday. But he's been a little bit more like me lately.
I think I'll drop one tomorrow. It's been a while.
But anyway, well, you guys, we love y'all, and it's been a lot of fun. And Tyler says, "Chew." And to our newer, anybody in the chats that hasn't been, thank y'all. We enjoy seeing you so much. And reach out if you guys need anything. You can also email at andreauplay@yahoo.com if you don't have an Instagram. Otherwise, just send me a message, Instagram message. I need to update my Spotify email because I almost missed this recommendation from someone because it went to like an old Yahoo address that I have that's not associated with the show. So either way, would you like to tell the people good night?
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
All right, guys. Until next time, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night, y'all.